Okay, we're going to call the meeting back to order. It's 1 o'clock. Welcome back. Just a reminder for those of you just tuning in, this is a continuation of a committee of the whole meeting that started this morning at 10:30 with a couple of presentations. Committee of the whole meetings are not final decisions. These are decisions and recommendations that will be made to the council meeting on May 17th. So we will pick right up with deputations. Item 5.1. Proposed sale of the unopened road allowance between 31 and 39 Fox Beach Lane in Carden. This is relating to item 8.1 on the agenda. We have a Luke Kumar and Lev Galinsky are joining us for a deputation, I believe. There's Luke. Good morning, good afternoon, Luke. Can you and Lev, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. So just a friendly reminder, you got 5 minutes, so go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks, folks. So my name is Luke, and my partner here is Lev. We are both owners of 20 Loon Drive, which is the property that abuts the road allowance that's in question for item 8.1 of the agenda today. Again, we're here to speak against the proposed sale. As part of a little bit of background on this, as part of us purchasing this property, we did do our due diligence with the city, Realty Services. Realty Services did advise us on December 17th, 2020 that road allowances leading to water are not approved for sale as for the fall 2001 City Council resolution. Concession 3 and 4 road allowance is one parcel of land, which stretches from north of Whippoorwill Lane all the way down to the lake, which is a single parcel with one PIN number. To conveniently accommodate the sale of the road allowance leading to water for 29 Fox Beach Lane, the city decided without any public consultation or notification to ratepayers to split the single parcel into two. Current encroachment structures erected by 39 and 31 Fox Beach Lane on public road allowances are in direct violation of bylaw section 2. These structures have been erected without permit nor permission from the city. In terms of communication, city only advertised the proposed sale on irrelevant mediums, i.e. city website and local newspapers. Instead, the city should have communicated directly to us via direct mail to ensure all parties have been notified. City didn't communicate anything to us about the splitting of the road allowance into two parcels. Also note that road allowances and shoreline road allowances are significantly different. The city deliberately intermingled road allowance with shoreline road allowance to conveniently facilitate the proposed sale. 31 Fox Beach Lane is a backlot. As such, it does not have a shoreline road allowance. Similar to the current situation, the approved shoreline road allowance for sale for 29 Fox Beach Lane is incorrect, as the shoreline road allowance is inclusive of the road allowance. Our rationale here, as per the 2001 City Council resolution, City Realty Services should have never proposed the sale. City should not reward ratepayers that deliberately violate city bylaws. Owners of 39 and 31 Fox Beach Lane knowingly erected structures on public road allowance. City needs to enforce all bylaws equally to all ratepayers. City simply cannot exercise bylaws on a case-by-case scenario. By council approving this proposal, the city will set precedents for all ratepayers to simply disregard and violate bylaws as there are no consequences. City's actions to absolve themselves of their mistakes in this issue should not come at our expense. Instead, the city should focus its efforts to address the owners that violated the city bylaw in a manner that protects the public's interest and safety. City should not resolve issues deliberately created by one owner at the expense of another. City staff and council's actions cannot devalue our property without consultation and compensation. If our property does not have immediate access to water, its value will reduce by more than 50%. By council approving this motion, council is knowingly devaluing our property and increasing the value of 39 and 31 Fox Beach Lane, who deliberately violated city bylaws. Such actions will expose city to litigation, which will result in financial harm to the city. We do have some proposed solutions. So option number one, if council does wish to approve the sale of the proposed lands, we want to purchase a portion of this road allowance leading to water that is equivalent to the other owners that have elected to purchase. We believe this is fair and equitable solution to appease all impacted owners and the city. Option two, if city council does not approve the sale of the proposed land, city council should enforce city bylaws accordingly to remove all structures that encroach on the public road allowance. rectify the approved sale of 29 Fox Beach Lane to what it should be. Put the single parcel of concession 3 and 4 road allowance back to its original state. Last option, option number 3, if council does approve the sale of the proposed land and exclude us from purchasing a portion of the land, we will vigorously defend our position and our property value at all cost. This option is likely the most expensive, resource intense, and time enduring process for all parties involved. I welcome any questions. I'm happy to address them as you see fit. Also note that I have shared a documentation prior to this meeting to all councillors that have been listed in this meeting as attendees. So you would have all received my documentation on Sunday night.
Yes, I can confirm we received it. Thank you. I'm just going to ask for a motion to receive the deputation, and then we'll see if there's any questions for you. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor Elmsley will second. Are there any questions for the deputant on their deputation? Luke, I have a quick question for you. So on the weekend, I went up and had a look at this property. It's basically a swamp. This road allowance is not a road allowance really leading to water. I mean, it's a bunch of, it looks like the bayou. It's not accessible. And in speaking with several of the neighbors, quite a few neighbors said to me that they haven't seen anybody accessing the water here in over 50 years. So I'm just wondering if you can address why you're saying people are using it and it leads to water when it's really just a swampy waterfront area that it doesn't look very accessible to me when I stood on the road and looked at it. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm not sure where you may have actually seen the actual road allowance, whether it's on Fox Beach Lane or through our property from 20 Loon Drive. We have accessed the water through our portion as well as 20 Fox Beach Lane as well. We've taken our kayaks and canoes through it. Note that there are structures that have been erected by 39 and 31 that fully encroach on the entire road allowance. We're not talking about minor variances here. They have garages and sheds that entirely sit on the road allowance. So it is accessible. However, these owners have knowingly violated the bylaws without any permission from the city and put up those structures only to their own benefit, not for the public, but they did that in violation of the bylaws.
Thank you. Any other questions for the deputants? Councillor Yeo, go ahead, sir.
Trying to find the right button there for mute, sorry. And I just have a question, I guess. The part, and maybe this is better for the report, but the part of the road allowance that's highlighted is only the part that leads to water. The back section that runs through the back properties, it isn't part of this transaction, correct?
So that's where the fallacy is, Councillor Emmett, because the entire road allowance that stretches from north of Whippoorwill Lane down to the water is a single parcel of land. However, city staff have actually gone ahead and somehow divide that up without any consultation, which is what is being proposed here for the sale, which is also another reason that we have an issue with this. Just to give it more context, we also own Whippoorwill Lane. That entire stretch from Lake Dalrymple Road down to Loon Drive is our parcel of land, to which the city has a limited services agreement that we've signed off to ensure that city services can be brought forth to all of the cottagers on Loon Drive. This was done after we purchased the property. And city services actually grades that lot to make sure that emergency vehicles and garbage collection services can continue to operate for the folks on Loon Drive.
Thank you.
Councillor Yeo, I think we can probably get some rationale from staff when we deal with the report as well. Thank you. Any other questions for the deputants? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? And that is passed. Thank you very much, folks. We'll deal with this when we come to item 8.1 in our agenda later on today. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your concerns.
Thank you, folks. And just a little added item. If anybody does have any questions, myself and Lev are available for discussion. Feel free to reach out to us. Happy to have that conversation with you guys in an open and honest way.
Thank you.
This has taken quite a bit of time for us to put together, so I trust that since there's no questions that everyone's aligned.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to item 5.2 was removed from the agenda, the deputation, so we'll go to 5.3, which is the Lindsay Ops Landfill Future Infrastructure and Operations Study related to items 7.4 and 7.41 on the agenda. Mr. David Webb is joining us. Welcome, Mr. Webb. Again, you got 5 minutes, so please go ahead, sir.
Very good. Thanks, Mayor. So my key message today is that the city has at least 5 waste-related initiatives in progress that impact one another. And the recommendations from each of them is being decided separately and in isolation from one another. I also have in my deputation some suggestions for very inexpensive ways to alleviate Lindsay landfill traffic congestion, potentially saving us $5 million. The suggestions I give here were provided to the project over a year ago when the Waste Management Committees saw the draft report. We are right now being asked to make decisions on multiple waste reports with major impacts between them.
David,
But
can
we're
I
not
interrupt? David, can I interrupt you for a minute? We're not hearing you very clearly. I don't know. It's very mumbled. I don't know.
I know what it is. I know what it is. I've set my cell phone in a vase to try and hold it up so I don't have to hold it by my hand. So
Well, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not working. So maybe you can try something else.
is it working now?
That's
Yes,
that's
is it
much
better now?
clearer. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So my key messages today, we've got over 5 waste-related initiatives in progress that impact one another, but decisions are being made on them separately and in isolation from one another. I've also got some suggestions on relieving traffic congestion at the Lindsay landfill that could save us $5 million. Right now, we're being asked to make decisions on multiple waste reports with major impacts between them, but we're not coordinating them in such a way that we see the big picture for decision making. The report you're going to see today on the future infrastructure and operations, the Dillon Future Waste Options Study, which is going to public consultations right now, the source separated organics request for information that's out on the street, the manufacturer's responsibility for Blue Box program, which will be impacting us within the next year and a half or so, and construction and demolition waste diversion expansion are all initiatives that the city has underway. But there's no action pulling them together to make sure decision-making is done with all of the impacts of each taken into full consideration. Instead, we're making long-term decisions on related issues in isolation one from the other. We're at risk of making decisions on each report in isolation and spending money we don't have to. The Future Waste Options Study public consultations are beginning this month, but they do not have the benefit of the decisions we will be making on other waste initiative fronts. Without seeing the big picture of our future waste management and instead making decisions in isolation, we risk not making the best decisions for CKL and potentially costing ourselves money. We may overachieve on some fronts and miss the mark on others due to misunderstood cross impacts. Rather than making the decisions on single project recommendations, we should be combining all of the project outputs, understanding the linkages and the cross impacts, and making big picture decisions. For example, we may make a decision today that goes to council for approval that will spend $5 million on improving Lindsay landfill, as recommended in the report. Later this year, after public consultations, we may decide that we don't want landfill at all. And so we've just headed down the road of spending $5 million that we didn't need to. Better to make those related waste management decisions as a unit, as part of the big picture. As for traffic congestion at the Lindsay landfill, one very inexpensive strategy to reduce the congestion is to maximize loads not requiring the scales. So the report recommends recycling loads that are free, bypass the scales, easy win. Additionally though, almost 90% of the traffic at the landfill is residential, and 83% of those loads are less than 200 kilograms. If instead of being weighed, those loads were also given the option to pay, say, a fixed fee, maybe 180 kilograms, they could also bypass the scales. If you did this, you could reduce the number of cars per day to around 50, a totally manageable and with the existing scales. Adding additional bins, as in option 3 in the report that you'll see today, adds the ability to reduce the drop-off time as well. The fees collected would be approximately equivalent to current, and it reduces traffic to a very manageable level, both at the scales and at the bins, with almost no capital outlay. As well, residential trips occur significantly more frequently on certain days of the week and certain hours of the day. If clients could be provided a means of judging their potential wait time on a particular day and hour of the day, they could be convinced to drop off at a less congested time. This could smooth out the curve and encourage loads evenly throughout the day and week. This could be accomplished through education and communication, but also by providing a real-time wait time indication from staff and maybe from a web camera that streams to the website and signage near the landfill. Also, charging slightly lower rates on low volume days could pull people to those days. The cost to implement is in the hundreds of dollars and could save 5 million. All of these congestion and reduction ideas are relatively expensive, can be implemented fairly quickly. We have some time to try them out before committing to the major cost that the report is recommending. So I recommend pause the public consultations on future waste option study that's starting this month. And before making any decision on the active initiatives, pull the big picture together, including future waste option study, Lindsay Ops, landfill future infrastructure and operations, SSO, the request for information that's on the street, construction and demolition waste reduction, which Lindsay Ops PRC has requested, and the manufacturer's blue box responsibility. That information should become part of the materials for a single public consultation and for the decision-making regarding all waste management. Meanwhile, test out some of the less expensive options I suggested for traffic congestion. Set up a camera, post real-time wait times, publish the best times, charge different rates per day and per hour. Divert those loads and maybe charge cars with small loads a fixed rate. For the longer term, I think expanding the Laxton and Fenelon Falls sites is a good idea to buy some time for Lindsay. But while we're doing that, implement full-blown source-separated organics and composting, expands construction and demolition waste diversion. You've just eliminated 90% of the waste that goes into the dump. Use the existing landfills for decades without having to expand. So thanks for your time. I'm free for questions.
Thanks,
Anybody?
Mr. Webb. Appreciate it. I'll get a motion to receive. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Elmsley, seconded by Councillor Ashmore. Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Webb on his deputation today? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. All in favor? And that is passed. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Appreciate you sharing your concerns with us once again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Item 6 is correspondence. We have none. Item 7 is presentations. We'll move right into our first presentation, Environmental Hero Awards presentation. And I will turn it over to our very own Deputy Mayor Richardson. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. The Kawartha Lakes Environmental Advisory Committee is pleased to present this year's Environmental Heroes, Business Heroes, and Environmental Youth Heroes. Each year, the committee awards the titles to individuals, businesses, and students living in the Kawartha Lakes who have shown a commitment to improving the wellness of our environment. This past year, we saw a variety of nominations and efforts for more sustainable garden projects, tree canopies, sustainable products, waste reduction, and education programs. But most importantly, we're seeing people do things in their communities, and we thank you for that, and thank you for being such an amazing stewards for the state of Kawartha Lakes. So we'll move through this. I'm quarterbacking today as Chair Pat Warren was unable to attend today, so I will run through the presentation. So welcome to all that are on the screen now. First off, I'd like to acknowledge Marnie Callahan, Elaine Windsor, and Sherry Sutton, who created a pollinator garden in the local Rayborough Park. This garden not only supports a wide diversity of life, but provides a spot of interest along the Trans-Canada Trail. Local residents were solicited to support the work, creating bonds within the community, as well as broadening the understanding of pollinators and native plants. Systems are put in place to educate the community through the gardening opening. These ladies are not just heroes in the environment, but they're bringing the community together during the pandemic for the looking at the future of their small town and caring so much about what's going on in their environmental community. Next. Second, I would like to acknowledge Richard and Sadie Godur saw as a need to actually enhance the headwaters of the Kawartha Lakes, came with the biodiversity to the good base to ensure good, clean water and healthy environments. They started the organization Plant a Forest, which they have a website. They have been connecting with the local landowners and conservation areas in the watershed area to plant indigenous plants. They do this by planting twice a year in the spring and in the fall, using plantings from local businesses. They get donations through their website and do more for through grants and help within the community. These are two people that do lots of work for the environment, one small garden at a time, so thank you for doing that. Our next is John Ireland. John Ireland is the founder of the nonprofit organization, the Urban Canopy Project in the city of Kawartha Lakes. Mr. Ireland's efforts have led to hundreds of trees being planted all across the city of Kawartha Lakes. John Ireland's selfless dedication to this community and environment is absolutely outstanding, and we thank you and your team. So thank you, John. Next, we have our environmental business heroes, and they're also our environmental heroes as well. This is Jenny and Jessica, who own the Unwrap downtown Lindsay. They have provided hundreds of different products and have saved thousands of tons of plastics from waste going to our landfills on a yearly basis. They keep things happening by providing new options all the time. They move to the bulk refill companies, they increase their products, and they are actually doing a lot of education throughout the community. Both Jenny Connell and Jessica Moyne should be accommodated, recommended that they've done an outstanding job as a business, environmental business in the city of Kawartha Lakes. Another environmental hero in business is Julie Taylor from the Country Cupboard in Fenland Falls. This is one of the most environmentally aware people in the city of Kawartha Lakes. She's taught people to stop using plastic bags, provide recyclable vessels for bulk items in her store, replaces plastics with environmental friendly products, and gives away trees annually and helps clean up the beaches and celebrates Earth Days with a passion. So thank you very much, Julia. Now we have some environmental business heroes to acknowledge today. One is Potash Creek Farms. It's a cut-your-own Christmas tree operation on a 99-acre property northeast of Amimi. It's a family business run by Dan Vanderswet. Each December, the Vanderswets open up for customers to cut their own spruce, pine, and fir trees. Each April, they plant 2 to 3 year seedlings in the balance of the trees, which is a constant, ongoing process. They've planted nearly 4,000 seedlings just in the last year. They protect the wetland adjacent to the property from livestock grazing this year and providing a project fencing through the Kawartha Conservation. Believers in contributing to their community, each year the Vanderswets donate to the town of Lindsay the large tree selected from the 7-acre stand of a wild spruce on their property. So thank you for being an environmental business in the city of Kawartha Lakes. Another business is Three Fork Farms, is a family-operated enterprise located on 98 acres just south of Bob Cage and in the Kawartha Lakes. Alyssa and Jared, owners of the farm, work hard to implement and rejuvenate sustainable practices in growing food for local customers, which includes raising chickens, heritage pigs, turkeys, sheep, and laying hens and growing vegetables. They are offering a very unique opportunity from their farm, and they are very focused on offering nutrient-dense food to the community and rejuvenating the land and prioritizing on how to make their farm different for the environment. And they also site tour of local farmers markets. So thank you for that, Three Forks Farm. Another one is environmental business hero is Fields Sparrow Farms. It's a family-run farm in Bob Cajun. Henry and Sarah Baker believe responsible and innovative farming strategies benefit our customers, producers, the community as a whole, and the health of the earth. They are committed to producing premium meats in an ecological, sustainable way and providing our customers with what they need locally. They believe in innovative farming strategies to show that they are doing better for the community and for the environment. And our last award is our Youth Heroes this year. We have a couple pictures of the 6 Lindsay Brownies. They are out there learning about the local bee keepers and being pollinators. They're doing the seed bomb workshops. They're out on the trails doing more. It's nice to see this group of brownies out there doing more for the community and passing on the education to others. So thank you today from Council, the Mayor, and CLIAC, which is the Kawartha Lakes Environmental Arts. I can't even speak, I'm running out of breath here. Thanks again from CLIAC, the Mayor, and Council for being such an incredible environmental stewards in the city of Kawartha Lakes. And you guys are, raised the benchmark, and we appreciate everything that you're doing and showing the others in our community what we can do. So thanks again.
Well said. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I'll just reiterate that. You're all obviously heroes in our mind. And on behalf of Council, it's much appreciated what you do for our environment. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, 7.2, We'll go down to our next presentation is a supporting housing program update. Rod Sutherland, the Director of Human Services, Lois Powers, Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Kawartha Lakes and Halliburton, I believe are both joining us. There's Rod. I'll turn it over to him to make the introductions, but welcome. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Council. I'm actually joined this afternoon by Shannon Spears, who is the Assistant Executive Director at John Howard, as Lois Powers was not available at the last minute today. But happy to have Shannon with me today. So I'm here along with Shannon to provide council with an update on the supportive housing program and changes to the services that are in the process of being made right now. In addition, there is a report on the agenda following the presentation that summarizes some of the information and provides a little bit further details as well. If we just have the slide presentation up, please. Okay. Thank you. When we refer to the housing system and the opportunities people have for housing, we refer to the housing continuum, as illustrated here, ranging from homelessness, which is a total lack of housing, to stable market housing, whether owned or rented. The cost and intensity of supports and services are generally highest for those in homelessness or not in permanent housing, for example, supportive housing. Supportive housing combines access to affordable housing with individualized, flexible support services for people with complex needs related to physical disabilities or illness, mental health concerns, and or substance abuse issues for those recovering from chronic homelessness. Next slide, please. So supportive housing is not new in our area and is a key approach to helping people maintain housing through a community-based approach involving many support services. The city's supportive housing programs has been in effect for a number of years now, including supports through what we call scattered units, where people live in various units throughout the community since 2007, as well as through the KLH, Kawartha Lakes Halliburton Housing Corporation, operated building at 68 Lindsay Street, north in Lindsay. The overall program has not been without its challenges. There has been quite a bit of attention on a number of issues over the years, and we continue to address those issues through these reviews. There have been failures that have been identified. For example, we have had people who have been evicted from the building or from units, and that is definitely for a program that targets eliminating homelessness, having to evict somebody and removing them from the unit is definitely a failure of the system. But there also have been a number of successes. And without getting into details of specifics, I can refer to, we've had over 81% of tenants maintain their housing for at least 12 months. We've had over 70% of tenants had measurable improvements in their health, personal health, and social well-being. For example, we had one person who had been homeless for 7 years before being housed here at 68 Lindsay, who has continued to maintain their housing. Next slide, please. So the opportunity to do a comprehensive review and reset of the supporting housing program, as we're calling it, aligns as well with the recovery planning from the pandemic and the review of our purchase of service agreement that we until recently had with Forecast. Forecast, Four Counties Addiction Services team, had been our contracted service provider for the last 2.5 years, and their agreement expired at the end of April. So our review looked at a number of different factors, including the external and unanticipated impacts, largely due to the pandemic. The impact on vulnerable populations, vulnerable people during the pandemic were considerable, in particular in terms of rental housing market, access to supports and services, and healthcare directly. A number of other agencies and services and supports were affected, largely to do with, or including to do with corrections in terms of the corrections system ability to maintain their services during pandemic and their consistent approaches. There's the nationwide opioid crisis and the housing crisis that I think we're all familiar with in terms of the cost of housing, the restricted access to rental market, and the housing system overall. We have been looking at a number of changes over the past 2 years, the last number of years, including during the pandemic. New partnerships and supports have been added. We've looked at, during pandemic, providing on-site vaccinations, COVID testing in housing communities and for people in supportive housing, new on-site security arrangements in buildings, including 68 Lindsay, and new access protocols in terms of how people access and who can access buildings. The overall review of the program over the last number of months has led to a new service agreement being developed with the John Howard Society of Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton as the new service provider to lead the services. They're not solely responsible for all services, but will lead the support program. Excuse me. With Shannon here today, I'll turn it over to Shannon, and she will be able to provide some more details about their John Howard's role and their services going forward. Shannon?
Thank you, and thank you for having us here this afternoon. John Howard Society has been in our community for over 35 years, so since 1985, it's going on 37 this year. But I'm going to reintroduce you a little bit to some of the programs that we do, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we want to work in the supportive housing program and how we want to make some changes. So we'll start with the first slide, please. Thank you. So we are, of course, a nonprofit organization committed to providing and developing programs that reduce the social, economic, and personal cost of crime. So really getting back to what our mandate is, which is fair, just, and humane responses to crime and its causes. Next slide, please. So we are one of 19 offices in the province throughout Canada. All of our services and our locations focus on crime prevention. We are, all of our services and all the programs that we provide are always based on best practices in the justice sector and in the social sector as well. We fall under the umbrella of the John Howard Society of Ontario, which is also known as the Centre of Research and Policy. And under that center is where we get a lot of our really good evaluations from. So we work collaboratively with the government to address the root causes of crime and to enhance community safety. Next slide, please. So these are some of the adult programs that we have to offer, in particularly to the tenants and the clients residing in the supportive housing program. It's important to note that all of our programs, these ones included, are all based with evidence-based, trauma-informed practices, meaning that we never provide a program to our community without evaluating it and knowing that it's really making tangible change in our community. Next slide, please. So again, some more of the programs that we have to offer. And you can see here that we do have an institutional services program. So we have staff going into Central East Correctional Center, which is just a really important gap. A really important bridge to the gap of individuals in the community who may be incarcerated and then coming out of the institution again. So speaking of the supportive housing program, we know a lot of the tenants of supportive housing are sometimes in the institutions. And so it's a really good way for us to remain in communication with them during that time. Next slide, please. So John Howard is no stranger to housing supports. We have a transitional house, 2 transitional houses with a total of 15 men that we support in the community. And really important to note that throughout the time that these houses have been supporting the community, we've really flown under the radar, which is important to us because it gives our clients privacy, but it also kind of speaks to the work we're doing in keeping our community safe and our clients safe and making sure that they have the supports they need. Next slide, please. We also do youth programming as well in our youth center at the Whitney Town Center location, and then in our Minden office as well. Some of the youth programs we offer. Next slide, please. So change needs evidence. So how do we create programs and how do we address needs in our community? So first things first is we identify the need in our community. And this happens with discussions with our stakeholders, discussions with our clients and our community partners, We create the conversations, such as here, and then we get and keep the issue on the radar. We use the findings that we have to create programs, to leverage changes, and then we always make sure that every program that we have and every program that we implement has really good evaluations and data. So then we can show the community and we can show our stakeholders and we can show our funders the difference that we're making in our community. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the RESET program. So commonly referred to in the community as 68 Lindsay Street. It was really important to us to make sure we gave the program a name that wasn't kind of based on the stigma that the 68 Lindsay Street name sometimes brings, given from its history of being in the newspaper and such. So what we plan to do with the RESET program is to provide ongoing counseling and supports to those living in KLH housing programs. We're going to provide wraparound services 7 days a week. We're going to do this through our community collaborations. We have some really great partnerships with other agencies in our community and plan on bringing them all in. We're going to build on the successes of the housing support programs in John Howard Society of Ottawa, Thunder Bay, and Kingston. These are really great programs, very similar to our RESET program, that are, again, evidence-based. They have been evaluated and they're making really tangible change. We're going to make sure we engage with our neighbors. We recognize that we are in their communities, and so we want to make sure that our neighbors have a voice, and we're able to talk to them, and we're able to address any concerns that they have, and we're able to get feedback from the residents on what they need, both our neighbors and our tenants within the buildings. We are a multi-service organization, and we're going to provide as such on site. And we really want to create a hub-like community response. So we don't want tenants of KLH buildings to have to leave to go find supports. We really want to bring the supports to them to make it really easy for them to get the support that they need. Next slide, please. So John Howard Society is an expert in anger management. We have run the program, the anger management program, in our community for many, many years. We're really good at recognizing when early intervention needs to happen and then going ahead with those interventions. We're really good at a neighborhood engagement, and we really respond quickly to community concerns. Our executive director is famous for passing out her phone number to anybody in the community who wants it, her personal cell phone, to make sure that citizens can contact her at any time with any problems. We are the provider of domestic violence programs across Ontario, along with all of our other affiliates, which can often be a concern in residential settings. From the COVID pandemic, this Partner Assault Response Program, our DV program, has increased significantly for the clients coming through, which speaks to that need. And we really want to support clients and tenants living in KLH buildings and the ones we're supporting in the community to develop and build on personal hobbies and interests. That's kind of the first step in really building a therapeutic community within the buildings and within our client base to make sure that their needs are being met, but also that they're living a fulfilled life. And with that comes finding out what interests them, what their hobbies are, and working with them to make sure that they're doing something that they feel good about. So with that comes this. These are all the great things that we think that the tenants and the clients in the RESET program have the ability to accomplish. Next slide, please. So like I said, we always evaluate every single program. RESET is no exception. I talked a little bit about the different models already in place. RESET in particular was built off the Ottawa residence. It's called the Rita Thompson residence. Really supportive therapeutic community model. They have a long history. They have individuals with long histories of homelessness living in their buildings. And so much like the RESET program, they have the hub model, something that we're going to continue to develop. In this particular model, there were amounts of phone calls to police and amount of aggressive incidences decreased. Like us, John Howard, Ottawa works with their neighbors to ensure communication and community engagement. So all things that are really important to us as a neighbor. Next slide, thank you. This is our team outlook. We know that people succeed when they're determined to succeed. John Howard believes in the good of everyone and bringing that goodness out and helping to do that in any way that we can support them in doing that. I guess the last slide, and if there's any questions, I am more than happy to answer them.
Well, thank you very much for that, Shannon and Rod. Appreciate the update. I'll just get a motion to receive the presentation, and then we'll see if there's any questions. Deputy Mayor Richardson, Councillor O'Reilly, are there any questions, comments for either of the deputants? Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of comments and then one question. First comment is welcome aboard. I had the pleasure of attending the session with the Executive Director of Ms. Powers, and I'm impressed with the program going forward. I think you really hit the ball there when you said it's communication with the neighbors, because a lot of the problems we've had, perceived or real, have been because the neighborhood doesn't know what's going on, so they've been relying on social media and rumors and those types of things. And with an aggressive communications plan, I think we can address a lot of those problems. My question to you is, I recognize that although some problems issue from 68 Lindsay Street, that's not the only location that they're coming from. Our other social housing units, are you planning on being involved in there and delivering the same level of service you are at 68 Lindsay Street?
Yeah, so first of all, Councillor Dunn, thank you so much. We really do know that our community doesn't operate in a silo, and neither do we. So making sure that we have those enhanced supports to our neighbors and with our partners is really important. We fully intend and will be providing supports to individuals living in any KLH housing building, living with private landlords as well. So anybody that needs support in that capacity, we will be providing. So we have a team in place who are capable of providing mobile response, and we'll be visiting those different buildings as well. We are cognizant that there are quite significant issues in our community right now. We're not going to change them overnight, but we're going to work really hard to make sure that we address a lot of the more important concerns now and work towards stabilization of this particular population.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that although many of the problems issue from housing or city housing units, there's lots of non-city units that are also contributing to the problem. And KLPS has done a great job. They've encouraged the residents on Mill Street, and I won't go any further than that, in changing their client base, and it seems to have resolved a lot of the problems over there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Richardson, you had a question?
More a comment. I just wanted to, touch base with the fact that I think some of our issues were, escalated when we were going through the pandemic, because, as you said, you're not being able to provide those in face-to-face services, and now us moving, with that reset mode and, providing those face-to-face services, I think you're going to get more engagement from everyone. You're going to be able to see what problems need more attention. I really think it's a great model going forward, because we've got people there that need our help, and with us providing the proper services and bringing them to them instead of them going looking for it, I think we're going to have a lot more success when it comes to cleaning up some issues. So thank you for joining us, and welcome aboard.
Thank you. Also, sorry, important to note, John Howard never actually closed its doors during the pandemic. So we continue to see face-to-face clients the duration of the pandemic, in recognition of the fact that a lot of these clients had nowhere else to turn. So a lot of the people that we're continuing to support are ones that we have seen during the pandemic, but we've seen the challenges that the pandemic has caused, and are cognizant of those as well. So again, working towards stabilization, both in the midst of the high acuity of the clients and also in the midst of the aftermath of COVID.
Thank you. Councillor
If I could
O'Reilly.
add, Mr. Mayor, the types of issues Shannon's spoken with and that we've experienced here in Kawartha Lakes are consistent with what we're hearing across the province and indeed across the country. The effects of the pandemic and other social factors as well has definitely been consistent in other areas. So we're building on and learning from the experience across the province as well.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly, you had a question?
Yeah, just a quick one to Shannon. The examples in the model you used were talking about large centers like Ottawa and Toronto. And I was just wondering, do you feel as though that you have enough supportive staff here to, for example, 68 Lindsay Street North, for example, it's enough supportive staff in-house to deal with the amount of issues we have? I know you talked about counseling, but I didn't see case management there and some other things. I just didn't know would you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so we really believe in quality over quantity. So we have a team in place right now that are there because they specialize in the amount of supports that we need to present to the clients. So from John Howard specifically, all based on evidence-based trauma-informed practices. So though we may not be many, we are skilled. And also our strength lies in our collaborations with our community. So we're not a silo, we're not going to do it by ourselves. We're very much going to invite in any partner who wants to come into those buildings with us and support those clients in any way that they need it. We're going to get them in. So anything that we are lacking in terms of skill, such as mental health supports, we're not specialized in mental health supports the way CMHA is, for example. We're going to invite them in. We're going to get the supports in there. So the clients have access to everything that they need access to. All of our staff are highly qualified in case management. It's something that comes very naturally to all of our staff, given that we are a multi-funded agency and we're just used to case management. We're used to the data reporting and the statistic analysis. So all things that we're familiar with. And again, we recognize the complexities of the population residing in these residences and in our community. And so we are setting realistic expectations and goals. But also we're going to go big and we're going to make change in the community. And we're going to stabilize that community, that population. If it's the last thing we do, I mean, we really are committed. We know what doesn't work. And so now going in with the model such as the Ottawa one, we're going to find out what does work. We know what works.
Thanks for that and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions for our presenters. We have a motion to receive. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much for joining us today, and welcome on board John Howard Society, and we look forward to progress reports as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item 7.2.1 is the report that goes with the presentation. Just re-emphasizing some of the comments. Supportive housing update, that report HH 2022-003 supportive housing update be received, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Councillors Elmsley and Dunn, any questions or comments on the report? Seeing none, all in favor? That is passed. Thank you. Hi, Kristen. We didn't forget about you. Thanks for being available if we had any questions, but looks like we got it covered. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move right down to item 7.3, which is our rural zoning bylaw consolidation project presentation. I will turn it over to Jonathan Derwerwiz, our planner two, to make introductions and give us an overview. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, Committee of the Whole. I'm Jonathan Derwerwiz, project lead for the city on the rural zoning bylaw consolidation. As you folks know, we reached a very big milestone earlier this year, which was the release of the first draft of the document. And we've been busy working away with our consultant, who we have on the screen with me, Matthew Rodriguez with WSP. He is my counterpart, my partner in crime for this project from WSP. And I am going to be turning it over to him to provide a overview of the project, where we are right now, what have we been up to, and then kind of setting the stage for moving forward.
Thanks so much, John. I'll just give it a second for the present. Perfect. The presentation is up, so let me just pin that. All right, so yeah, good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. My name is Matthew Rodriguez with WSP, the project team that is working with the city on the rural zoning bylaw review process over the past couple of years now. So excited to be providing an update to you, and we'll provide some exciting statistics and where we're at in the process. Next slide, please. So we'll just provide a brief overview of the project purpose, the timelines, where we're at in the whole process, where we're at to date in the process, the foundations for the project. I think it's important to just, given the timelines of this project, understand what are some of the foundations for this exercise, an overview of the first draft, and then just a brief summary of some of the next steps and what people can look forward to in the process. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the rural zoning bylaw review really has three key pillars. The first is to consolidate and modernize the 14 existing rural zoning bylaws, implement the policies of the city's official plan. As you may be aware, most of the rural zoning bylaws date back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and there is a need to implement the city's official plan policies through the zoning bylaw. Through this exercise, there's also an opportunity to address key zoning issues. There's issues that apply broadly across the city that we need to address. And one thing you'll notice that's perhaps a bit different on this slide compared to when you've seen this map or this slide previously is that we're now looking at 14 rural zoning bylaws instead of 13. And that reflects that we are now looking at the Woodville zoning bylaw. And I'll get through that on a dedicated slide a little bit later in the presentation. As a refresher, we are not looking at the urban settlement areas of Bobcaygeon, Fenland Falls, Lindsay, and Omemee. We are also not looking at the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan bylaw through this process. So just that caveat of what we're looking at through the rural zoning bylaw review. Next slide, please. So excited to be here today presenting to you, and what we're doing today is actually closing out stage 2 of the process. So we started back in fall 2019 in stage 1 where we prepared a discussion paper. And so following completion of that draft discussion paper, we held 3 public open houses. We presented to council back in February 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago. We then jumped into phase 2 where we prepared an issues and methodologies report. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail later. There was a bit of a pause in the project due to the pandemic, and we kicked things back off in the fall of 2020 with preparing the first draft zoning bylaw. And that did take some time, given that the number of zones and the amount of area that we were looking at through this project. And so we did get that out, as Jonathan said, earlier this year for public release. Before doing that, we held 2 workshops in February of 2021 related to the waterfront and agriculture. We held a public open house in April 2021 to have just a touch point with the community. And then most recently, back in March, we held 3 public open houses to present the draft bylaw, and we're here today with a council update. We head into phase 3, which is the second and final draft of the zoning bylaw throughout the rest of the year. And some of the upcoming engagement milestones include the statutory public open house and the statutory public meeting. Throughout the process, we've been engaging through the Jump In project website, as well as the Rural Zoning Bylaw Review Task Force and technical agency meetings. I'll note that just some statistics in terms of who's been coming out to these meetings. Back in 2019, we had about 80 people come to the public open houses. Back in April, we had about 30 people come to the singular open house that we had. But back in March, we had about 108 people come to the 3 public open houses that we had. So we're seeing still really great continued public involvement in this process, despite the challenges presented by the pandemic. We've also seen a lot of traffic on the Jump In Kawartha Lakes project webpage. About 405 people have downloaded the bylaw, and another 85 people have viewed the open house presentation. So continuing to engage and spread the word about the rural zoning bylaw review process. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the discussion paper that was prepared in 2019 and the issues and methodology report that was prepared in 2020. And really these set the foundation for us preparing the first draft of the rural zoning bylaw review earlier this year. we've brought together those 13 bylaws into one document with 37 zones, which significantly streamlines the number of zones that apply across the rural area, but also recognize the unique differences and subtleties that need to be reflected in the bylaw. Next slide, please. So we'll go over a few key project foundations. Next slide, please. So what is a zoning bylaw? I think it's important to set the stage for what a zoning bylaw is looking at. It's a regulatory tool implemented through the Planning Act. It implements the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan, establishes detailed permissions for land use and development standards, contributes to the built form and function of the city, and complements other city bylaws and initiatives. So really touches on a lot of different things that are happening in the city, and we're not looking at it in isolation. So the city's doing a lot of other work, such as around source water protection and ARUs, or additional residential units, that we're looking at through this process. Next slide, please. For the key goals of the official plan are, again, to implement the city's official plan. It's important to just keep that front of mind as we go through some of the updated provisions and policies. We're going to be consolidating the 14 rural zoning bylaws into a modern and user-friendly document. And if you've had a chance to check it out, hopefully you were able to find your way through it easily. Public and stakeholder input has really been key in developing the bylaw. And for example, the waterfront provisions that you'll see in the bylaw were directly informed and influenced by some of the things that we heard at the workshops and public open houses that we held, and all the other input that we've received through the process. The issues and methodology report really serves on the basis of some of the recommendations and where we went forward with the bylaw. Next slide, please. So now I'll provide a brief overview of the first draft. Next slide, please. So I wanted to break it up into sort of 3 key sections of the bylaw. Chapters 1, 2, 3, and 13 deal with administrative matters. So that's where you'll go to look for administration and interpretation provisions. That's where the zones and schedules are established and described. And then Chapter 3 defines a number of key terms that are used through the bylaw. Chapter 13 is a fairly simple but important chapter, and that enacts the bylaw once council adopts the new zoning bylaw. Chapters 4 and 5 apply across the rural area and include general provisions for things such as the waterfront, garden suites, accessory structures, and the like. Chapter 5 deals with parking and loading facilities. So those are those minimum parking requirements and loading requirements for loading into different types of uses. We've also considered new bicycle parking requirements in this chapter for some of the rural uses in the city. Chapters 6 through 11 deal with the new zone categories. So we've grouped the zones together into different overarching categories, being residential, agricultural, commercial, industrial, environmental protection and open space, and community use. And so you can go there, and they each have a color code assigned to them that's used consistently through the document to know where you are in the bylaw. I'll get into this in a bit more detail on an upcoming slide, but Chapter 12 will include all of the exception zones, which are currently being reviewed. Next slide, please. As part of the first draft, we released an interactive map and a set of PDF maps to accompany the draft zoning bylaw. These really show where the zoning regulations apply to a property, and there's 3 key elements. The first is zone mapping, so understanding which zone applies to your property. If your property is in a wellhead protection area, and what zoning regulations are associated with that. And it also sets out the Conservation Authority regulated area. And so that's a change from the current bylaws to show where the conservation authorities may have jurisdiction, to sort of signify to a developer or those looking at the bylaw to consult with the Conservation Authority as part of their process. Next slide, please. So some of the key big moves and big wins, rather, through the first draft rural zoning bylaw. The first is waterfront protections. As you're probably aware, the city's official plan sets out a series of policies to protect the water and some of the environmental protections in that regard. So through the bylaw, we've set water setbacks, we've set up provisions for shoreline naturalization and shoreline activity. We've also set out new permissions for existing structures and non-complying lots, recognizing that not all lots in the rural area or along the waterfront, for that matter, can comply with the policies of the official plan. New agricultural zones are set out. These recognize on-farm diversified uses and agriculture-related uses within the context of the current official plan. And so I think that's an important piece here, is that the current official plan may go through an update in the future that will change the permissions for these types of uses. But for now, we've implemented them as they are in the official plan, while providing as much flexibility as possible. We've set out zoning provisions for seasonal farm help dwellings. to help add accommodations and support the agricultural economy. Environmental protection was another key issue that we heard about through the consultation process. And so at this time, and tying into the flooding and hazardous lands piece, we've maintained the extent of the environmental protection zone at this stage. We have not changed the extent of that based on the official plan. The intent is that through the development process, as development applications come in, site-specific environmental impact studies will study the extent of the natural heritage system, as well as any EP lands, and an appropriate zone can be applied at that time. To help mitigate and to help sort of provide a balance there, we've, as I said, delineated the Conservation Authority regulated area to show where folks may need to consult or seek a permit through the CA. We're also in the process right now of working with the conservation authorities on updated mapping and provisions for the Burnt River, and you'll notice a placeholder in the rural zoning bylaw at this time for the Burnt River while we work through those updates. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go over some of the key things that we heard since the release of the first draft of the rural zoning bylaw. We've received written comments from a number of different people, being the members of the public. We received comments from CLIAC, landowners, and other industry groups who want to make sure that we're thinking about all these different topics in the rural area. And so it's been fantastic to review those, and we're in the process, as John mentioned, of reviewing those comments, providing responses, and updating the bylaw accordingly. In March 2022, we held 3 public open houses, and at that we received comments live in real time from the community and following the session as well. We received comments about how we define the high water mark. We received a number of questions about short-term rentals. The rural zoning bylaw at this time does not regulate short-term rentals, and city staff may be able to provide some more context on that should there be any questions. And then there were also comments received for us to take a second look at some of the special policy areas in the official plan. And so these comments are fantastic and really help us refine the second draft. But the first draft is a significant milestone for the city, as it is sort of that first cut of bringing all the zones and bylaws together. And now we can refine and improve from here. Next slide, please. So what's next in the process? Next slide, please. A significant undertaking that we're working through as we speak is the exceptions review. There's over 1,000 site-specific exceptions that need to be reviewed as part of this process. They also need to be mapped in a new digital database. And so we need to take all of those existing zoning bylaw amendments, zone changes since the 70s or whenever that specific bylaw was approved till now, map them and make sure that they're in a consistent database. At this time, we expect that most exceptions will be reviewed and carried forward. Some will be removed where there's explicit permissions in the bylaw, or there's perhaps they might be expired temporary use bylaws, or otherwise are no longer needed, but we expect that most will be carried forward. As I mentioned, some exceptions may be deleted based on the criteria set out in the issues and methodology report. And so I encourage you to take a look at that if you have any questions about that. But this is a significant piece of work that we're working through right now and look forward to releasing it as part of the second draft. Next slide, please. So I did say I'd come back to the Woodville zoning bylaw at the beginning of the presentation. So for a bit of context, as council may be aware, following the Ontario Land Tribunal settlement, the village of Woodville is now subject to the hamlet policies of the city's official plan. The Woodville zoning bylaw was previously excluded from the rural zoning bylaw review and is not subject to the first draft. So if you look to the first draft, they're sort of whited out over Woodville. But since that time, we've received direction and we've been working with the city to revise the project scope to consolidate the Woodville zoning bylaw and review zoning standards for Woodville. We're also planning a public open house to be held in late spring of this year to introduce the project to the Woodville community and share preliminary zoning recommendations. So, they may not have come to the previous open houses since they didn't think they were affected, but so we felt that it was important to touch base with the community, both to introduce the project and to present some of our recommendations as they go forward. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, just in terms of the next steps. We are working through the second draft zoning bylaw as we speak, and we'll be releasing that this spring. We'll consider all of the comments received on the first draft, and as well as those site-specific exceptions that I mentioned. We're working through the Woodville zoning bylaw consolidation, and we'll be working towards scheduling a public open house at a later date. And then we'll be working towards a statutory public open house targeting for July 2022 as we wrap through the second draft zoning bylaw. So that's my presentation. The jumpinkawarthalakes.ca page has all the project documents, mapping, and upcoming opportunities to get involved. I'd be happy to answer any questions as council may have.
Thank you, Matthew. And Jonathan, appreciate that. Good update. Just get a motion to receive. Councillor Vale, second by Councillor Yeo. Questions? Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both for the presentation. I just wanted to go back to one item you had in there, which was short-term rentals. And I wonder if you could tell me in the second draft, what is going to be the position on short-term rentals? Are we recommending any licensing, or are we content to live with the current structure of short-term rentals?
Thank you for that question, and through to the chair. So with regards to short-term rentals, under the current, I guess, framework or structure of how those are regulated, no zoning bylaws currently speak to them. Staff had internal discussions on whether or not this is something that we would want to include going forward. We understand there are concerns from the community on this particular item, and I also see that Director Hawley has turned his camera on, and I may look to him for further direction to respond to your question.
Sure, thanks, Jonathan. Through the mayor to the councillor, I think our plan is to keep the short-term rentals piece as we're currently handling it. You may be aware, may recall that we reviewed this a number of years ago, sort of comprehensively through the municipal law enforcement group. At that time, the decision was made not to license it. There are a couple of matters that are sort of going through the courts right now, and through the OLT, I believe there's one test case right now. But I think until that sort of works itself through, I think we're going to leave the short-term rentals as it is. Because I think it involves more than just a zoning review. It'll probably involve other departments as well. So I think if we're going to tackle that issue, we need to sort of tackle it sort of through multiple departments. So the recommendation is to leave it as it is for now. But you know, if additional information comes up where these could be handled differently, then we can certainly review it at that time.
Thank you for the answer. Is there any way we can flag it? Because I believe that since we looked at it and we passed the bylaw that does talk to short-term rentals and the penalties for people misusing the property, there have been more and more of them come into creation, and I'm starting to have a lot more issues and complaints around them. And so it certainly would be helpful if we flagged it for a future look in the not too distant future. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Councillor Vale.
Thank you. Not my question, but I will touch on the short-term rental, because I know at the committee we did have a discussion about that too, and my feelings are similar to Councillor Elmsley's, that I get where we are in the process with the project, but I think that we would be prudent to have an overall look at short-term rentals and incorporating it, if not before it's approved, after it's approved as an addition to deal with some of these. And to Councillor Elmsley's point, there seems to be more and more starting to pop up that, 3-bedroom homes are being used as accommodations for 20 plus people over a weekend, and the neighbors are not overly happy. But back to my question is, I just want to touch on where we're going with the addition of Woodville. I do have a concern that today is the 3rd of May. We've got a date of late spring, which would be June, to release the second draft. And we haven't targeted a date for the open house, and we haven't notified anybody in that community that's been left out of this process completely. So I do have some concerns that this open house is going to happen, and there's going to be comments and concerns from that community that are going to be left out of this because the second draft will already have been published.
Anybody want to tackle that comment?
Thank you, through the mayor, to Councillor Vale. Yes, I do understand the concern. We are working on getting that added to the project. We will likely have to do some catch up, and in the sense that while the overall project moves ahead, we'll likely have to do some targeted consultation in Woodville sort of separately, just to sort of catch them back up and then bring them into the sort of the overall stream of that zoning bylaw review. So we will do consultations in Woodville, and it will likely be sort of more targeted to Woodville, and then explain the whole process to them, but they won't be left out from a consultation perspective.
And through the chair, if I could potentially add to that, I think our intention is certainly not to release a next draft of the bylaw and until such time as we've engaged with the Woodville community. And our hope is that at that public open house, that we present draft recommendations similar to the first draft of the bylaw, and so that when the second draft comes out, they have a sense of where things are going, and it's not, sort of out of left field. And so certainly you can take the timing away and have those discussions with the city. But yeah, certainly our intention is not to release a second draft without having consulted with Woodville.
Okay, I appreciate that. It goes to another concern that I raised at the committee level, that we're pushing this. We were already pushing the final report back. That final report was supposed to be back fall of 22, and we're now talking spring of 23. So dealing with this, how does that affect the end deadline?
So I can respond to that. Obviously, there have been some delays. The original project was supposed to have been completed this year. However, with COVID, unfortunately, it hasn't allowed us to finish it, in the fall, or sort of in advance of for this term of council. And unfortunately, we will have to push it out to the beginning of next year. I don't see any other way of completing the project, and minimizing any chance of appeals.
And through the mayor to council, I think I can also add that the fall gives us an opportunity with that election period to diligently go through the comments that we received on the second draft, and so that as soon as we can feasibly come forward to the new council, once that new term is in place, or new council's in place, we'll be in a position to do that. But our hope is that the Woodville addition doesn't push the deadline. It's rather just sort of a two-track process that we're reviewing Woodville and the second draft at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunn, question?
Question / comment. I don't understand the word targeted consultation. I know what a public meeting is, but to do targeted consultation in place of a public meeting, I don't understand what we're talking about.
So I believe, John, did you want to start with something?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Matt, through the mayor to the councillor. So targeted consultation in regards to Woodville is we would be essentially focusing the consultation and have a Woodville oriented public information session. So it would the consultation, it would be a, you know, what we would call a public consultation session or event, but the content would primarily be on the Woodville bylaw, with, of course, as Director Hawley and Matthew said earlier, bringing Woodville up to speed on the project, where we're at, providing that high level overview of the stage and the processes that basically brought us to where we are. But the content, as far as comments and discussion purposes, would largely be around the Woodville bylaw.
Okay, just so long as we're not targeting the people we want to consult and forgetting the rest of the people. That's the way I kind of read that. We're going to do targeted consultation, so we're going to fix 5 or 10 people in Woodville to consult with, and the rest of the village will just will assume that's been done because we targeted the right people. That's where I
understood.
Thank you, Councillor Ashmore.
Yeah, not.
Thank you. To you, Mr. Mayor, to I guess maybe Richard. I remember going to the first meeting in Downeyville in April of 2019. So if we're looking at 2023, there's 2019, 2021, 22, 23, that's 5 years before this will be completed. And we stopped for 6 months. I know council had to adapt, and we went to Zoom meetings right after things shut down in April of 2020. And I just wondering, like, we did lose a lot of time here, 6 months, and why we couldn't adapt to, I know we can't change what happened back then, but it would have been good that we could have been able to engage the public or had Zoom meetings or tried something to get this thing going, not just fast track, but just complete it on time. So I was just wondering, you're saying 2023, is that realistic, or is that definite date that it'll be done? Do you foresee? Thanks.
Through the mayor to Councillor Ashmore, yes, I do see that as realistic. We do want to do as much consultation as we can. We feel that is going to give us a very robust bylaw to bring before council for the statutory public meeting. And we do feel that is a realistic time frame.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to receive. I'm going to call the question. Oh, we got another question. Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a question regarding the special zoning. There's 1,000 cases, and you had a line in there that a little concerning when you said you're going to just carry on with most of them. So the word most means there's going to be some that aren't going to be carried forward. And I want to be assured that those properties affected by not being carried over, will they be individually contacted and told their property will no longer have specific zoning on it?
I could perhaps respond to maybe some of the criteria, and then maybe staff could respond to maybe the process. So as I think I mentioned, the issues and methodology report sets out some of the criteria where we may consider deleting an exception. There's some others that are perhaps they're more of a housekeeping matter and wouldn't directly impact a property. So for example, temporary use bylaws that are expired, they technically count to that 1,000 plus. We no longer need to carry that forward into the new bylaw, for example, or if a bylaw was deleted by a future bylaw. Just some high-level examples of where it's more of a housekeeping item, but there are some instances where, as I said, maybe the bylaw explicitly permits things or the official plan explicitly prohibits things. But our intention, is to carry things forward and update them, and maybe I'll pass it to staff for some of the next steps once that's done.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Through to the councillor. So the exception zones, you're right. There's a lot. There's over 1,000. It's quite a monolith of an Excel document that we're been working through. And what I can say is that we're not going to be removing property rights from property owners through this exercise. We're going to be identifying properties where, as a result of the new zoning bylaw coming into effect, a exception zone that exists is currently no longer necessary. So with that, it's not like we're changing the permitted uses or necessarily what someone can do on their property. It's just that an exception zone, the hyphen number, when you look at it on a schedule, on a map, or in the document, that's just no longer going to be necessary in some cases. So when will we notify the affected property owners of that? That is something we can certainly look at doing. We, in our records, in that spreadsheet, we do have all of the geographical information, I guess, that we need to contact these property owners. So that is something we could certainly consider doing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the presenters? Seeing none, we have a motion to receive. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you for updating us on that. I look forward to the next phase. Thank you. So I think we'll work on our last presentation before we take a quick break. We'll go right into 7.4, which is the Lindsay Ops Landfill Future Infrastructure and Operations Study presentation. I know Adam Found is going to join us. There he is, our Manager of Corporate Assets, and Paul Mulholland from WSP. I'll turn it over to you, Adam, to get us started. Go ahead.
That's great. Thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. So I'll be fairly brief. I'll just introduce the project and the presentation for today. So I think, as council is aware, there is a need to have some kind of upgrades occur at the Lindsay Ops landfill for a couple of reasons, as is stated in the report. And so what we've done is undertake a study to inform how we go about implementing those needs. And the city retained WSP for that purpose. And so the goal for today is to present council with the results of that study and to hopefully get some direction from council to make sure that we can properly plan for the required upgrades. So I guess with that said, I'll turn it over to Mr. Mulholland, who is the lead on this project at WSP's end, and he will walk us through the presentation, and of course we'll remain in order to answer any questions that council might have. So with that said, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everyone, for your time this afternoon. As Adam said, my name is Paul Mulholland. I'm with WSP Canada. I'm the project manager for the Future Infrastructure and Operations Study that was completed for the Lindsay Ops landfill. With me today is also Ishraq Hassan from WSP. He's an engineer that's worked on the project extensively as well. Next slide, please. A brief introduction of the project. So we were retained by the city to assess the ability of the landfill, the Lindsay Ops landfill, to manage additional waste and recyclables, in particular from the Fenelon and Laxton landfills. To complete this study, we looked at existing landfill infrastructure, operational practices at all the sites, issues and deficiencies that were observed by ourselves, as well as discussions with the city. And through these observations, we came up with we evaluated several infrastructure and operational upgrade options, including the cost estimates to go with it. Next slide, please. Some background on waste management within the city. The city, as you all are likely aware, operates 5 landfills for disposal of waste and recyclables. That's Lindsay Ops, Somerville, Eldon, and Fenelon. You may be able to see that the locations of Lindsay Ops, Fenelon, and Laxton on the image to your right. Fenelon and Laxton are approaching their approved capacities, both expected to be at their limit in 2024. And the city is considering diverting waste from Fenelon and Laxton to Lindsay Ops upon closure of Fenelon and Laxton. What the impact on on Lindsay Ops would be as a result of that would be an increase in waste quantities at Lindsay Ops by 34%, which would in turn reduce the site life at Lindsay Ops. Next slide, please. So the average waste disposal rate, I will go through the site operations at each landfill very briefly. Average waste disposal rate is a number you'll see for all three sites. It's 45,000 cubic meters per year utilized airspace at the Lindsay Ops landfill. The Lindsay Ops landfill currently will reach its approved capacity by 2035. That'll be at its final contours as approved with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. Operating hours are noted there. Key point is that it's closed to the public on Wednesdays, but does still continue to accept curbside municipal waste. Operated by 5 to 6 full-time staff with some assistance from contractors during busier times. And of course, there's the public drop-off, household hazardous waste, and leaf and yard composting facility on site for various diverted materials as noted in the list. Next slide, please. For Fenelon, the average waste disposal rate is 1/3 of Lindsay Ops, 15,000 cubic meters per year. It's expected to reach capacity by 2024 as noted. Operating hours are shown on the slide here. We also have 4 full-time staff when the site's open with an additional staff during peak times. The list of materials accepted at the site are a little less than Lindsay Ops, but there's still a household hazardous waste depot and a leaf and yard composting facility at the site as well as public drop-off. Next slide, please. The Laxton landfill receives the least amount of waste of the 3 sites, about 4,500 cubic meters per year. Again, I noted the 2024 is the capacity. When the operating hours are less than the other 2 sites, given its less use for less capacity, less quantity of materials received. It's operated by 1 full-time city staff and a private contractor, and it has a leaf and yard composting facility as well as drop off for recyclables and other materials. Next slide, please. So this figure displays the existing infrastructure at the Lindsay Ops landfill, basically taking it from the scales north to the public drop-off area. If you look at the figure, the magenta arrows are our inbound traffic flows as currently is existing, and the blue arrows are outbound traffic flows as currently existing. The main site entrance is actually about 270 meters south of the scales in the figure off of Wilson Road. It's a 2-way paved road to the active landfill and the leaf and yard composting facility on site. And on this figure, also note the yellow bins and the blue bins in the public drop-off area. They're indicative of being either grade separated or on grade bins. So yellow being grade separated, blue being on grade. And also there is a municipal curbside recycling transfer facility operated on site, which is hard to make out on my screen right now. Hopefully it's coming in clear for everyone else, but it's in the middle of the site, roughly to the west of, it's just slightly to the west of the yellow bins. Next slide, please. During our study, we came up with a list of current issues and deficiencies that we observed. One issue was during peak times, traffic backed up onto Wilson Road. In discussions with city staff, we noted up to 1-hour wait times at the weigh scales could take place. Outbound traffic, this also was an issue for queuing at the public drop-off area. Traffic would back up, blocking access to bins, blocking access to the roads, blocking access for other site users, general congestion in that area. Existing weigh scales were noted as an issue. They're nearing the end of their service life. They are malfunctioning more frequently than before, and their downtime is also causing issues with queuing. And congestion at the public drop-off area was another issue. I touched on that briefly just now, but the bins being located on grade and with grade separation basically take up roadway and cause issues with traffic pulling in and getting out of the parking spaces. They block the traffic gets blocked as a result of that. Site users have to wait for traffic flow for users to drop the materials off before they can continue on. In some cases, this blocks outbound traffic, creates an even larger queue. The last point notes that users behind the queued vehicle either wait or go around if there's adequate space, but there's not usually adequate space due to the on-grade bins. Next slide, please. We also looked at projected quantities for the Lindsay Ops landfill moving forward. We looked at the city's growth management strategy, the municipal master plan, and the 2019 landfill data. You'll note 2019. I know we're in 2022. The project did begin in 2020. This we used the data available, and the addition of the Fenelon and Laxton studies caused the project to be a little postponed for this presentation today. However, I will go into the quantities. We did note that for traffic and waste, recyclables, diverted materials quantities, we made an assumption that all those materials and traffic from Fenelon and Laxton would be diverted to Lindsay Ops. The site would reach its approved capacity by 2030 at Lindsay Ops as a result of all waste diversion. There's also other assumptions noted that there would be no changes to the current diversion numbers, and that waste quantities. And the second point there notes that waste quantities would periodically exceed the approved limit. So the site, in the environmental compliance approval for the site with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, has a clause in it where the limit of waste received on site on any given day it's a limit on how much waste can be received. So that clause would have to be amended with the Ministry of Environment in order to allow waste from Fenelon and Laxton to be diverted to Lindsay Ops, as you'd be exceeding that limit daily. Number of vehicles visiting Lindsay Ops would increase by an average of 49% by 2030. And you can see the percentages there. On average, on peak days, we said it was just under 80%, and the maximum increase we noted based on increased traffic to the site would be 108%, so more than double in the month of June during our peak times. Next slide, please. Hopefully my connection's still okay. It's getting a little blurry on my end. Current issues and deficiencies at the Lindsay Ops landfill need to be addressed in order to maintain a positive level of service. We noted that the level of service will worsen over time due to population growth, diverted traffic from Fenelon and Laxton, and aging infrastructure. Several options were developed and evaluated, and these include infrastructure upgrades at Lindsay Ops, as well as operational upgrades at Lindsay Ops and other landfill sites. Next slide, please. Thank you. Option one was considered just for the sake of showing what would happen if we do nothing. So we noted the existing weigh scales would continue to malfunction. They would over time continue to need more frequent repair and be more costly as the repairs add up. An increased downtime result would cause longer wait times. The queuing would not be addressed at the inbound or outbound lanes. Your congestion at the public drop-off area would not be addressed, and there would be any new costs associated with doing nothing. Next slide, please. For option two, expanding the existing public drop-off area we looked at, and I'll briefly go through these options as I will summarize them in the recommendations at the end. So option two, and if an option is not included in a recommendation, I will, and if a counselor or someone has more questions on it, I can answer them after the presentation, but for the sake of time, I'll go through these quick. So option two expanded the public drop-off area. You'll note that there's a green area hatched out in the figure to the right. We looked at expanding that area by about 700 square meters to allow traffic flow to bypass some of the grade separated bins. The capital cost of this would be about $118,000 for the earthworks and paving. Next slide, please. Option number three was utilizing the area north of the existing municipal curbside transfer facility that I mentioned earlier. So you'll note that we've got 7 on-grade bins shown north of that transfer facility, and we no longer have on-grade bins in the existing public drop-off. We've changed traffic flow slightly to accommodate this. We've added some Jersey barriers. It's very minimal capital cost. You'd have to move some stored materials around as well, but the capital cost would be around $20,000 for the line painting and Jersey barriers. And there'll be an additional operational cost, as we do not believe the attendant would be able to look after the grade separation and the on-grade bins. Next slide, please. Option 4A we looked at is utilizing the area east of the existing public drop-off area. This will tie into option 4B as well. You'll notice they're very similar. Option 4A utilizes the utilizes the service entrance off of Wilson Road. So 4A and 4B both would require upgrades to Wilson Road in order to utilize this access. In option 4A, we've considered public traffic all stays on-site, enters through the main entrance, passes over, and goes through over the scales, utilizes and would drive in and have new grade separation bins at an extended public drop-off area to the east. The capital cost of this option would be 1.7 million, and there would be additional operation costs for staff as well, as you'd need another attendant in that area. Next slide, please. For option 4B, we've considered something very similar to 4A as noted, except we've flipped the public drop-off area. So now public traffic would actually access it from Wilson Road instead of the site, with the idea being only free materials to be dropped off in this area. So operations staff would be able to access the bins from the landfill side rather than Wilson Road. You'd still need another attendant at the kiosk, but the idea that you'd have to have signage, and make the public aware that they would have to utilize this entrance under this option. And the capital cost would be 2.18 million for earthworks, paving, concrete, etc. Next slide, please. Option 5 would be redesign. It was a complete redesign of the existing public drop-off area, utilizing as much as we could of the existing infrastructure, but we built new roads, new retaining walls for grade separated bins, allowing for expansion for future bins as well. Have one-way traffic through the area. Very little change to actual traffic flow that's existing currently. However, this is the most expensive of the options at 3.8 million. It would be a large undertaking to complete all the work. Next slide, please. For option 6, this option actually does not relate to the other options. This option is to do with the inbound and outbound scales as well. And the idea is that we would move the outbound scale to the south and add additional scale house and staff member in there to increase the queuing lane for the outbound traffic. And also we've suggested a second inbound scale to increase the time, to decrease the time that traffic would for site users to get into the site. The capital cost of this would be 1.67 million. A lot of the cost on here is also related to road improvements that would need to be done in order to accommodate the second scale at the inbound lane. Next slide, please. We reviewed operational upgrades as well. One main operational upgrade would be to replace the existing weigh scales. Capital cost estimate for both inbound and outbound is 500,000, and the scales are just over 18 years old. The typical service life for scales around 20 years, so it's getting there. Option number 2, establish and operate transfer stations at Fenelon and or Laxton after site closure. This was reviewed as part of studies that were appended to the main report. All existing infrastructure would continue to be utilized at Fenelon and Laxton. We already have drop-off scales on those sites. We would We would have to add additional bins for waste disposal, but the cost would be relatively minimal to set those sites up as transfer stations. We estimate $20,000 per year for earthworks and minor site works to get the sites set up. The operational costs are shown as well. Now, based on having the site set up as a waste transfer station, the difference with this would have to be environmental approvals. The sites would have to go through the Ministry of Environment to get approvals for that to operate the site as such. Next slide, please. Vertical expansion of Fenelon and Laxton to increase their landfilling capacity was also reviewed. Feasibility studies were completed. And in general, the Ministry of Environment will allow sites to be expanded up to 40,000 cubic meters without going through the environmental assessment process, which is a lengthy process compared to the environmental compliance approval amendment process. Environmental compliance approval amendment takes roughly 6 months. The EA process is significantly longer. It's measured in years. 4 expansion options were identified for Fenelon. Site capacity could be increased by 40,000 cubic meters to extend site life to 2027. And the most economic option would be $90,000 additional cost. And this would be in the phase 2 area, which was recently constructed and is currently being landfilled. 2 expansion options were identified for Laxton. The site capacity could be increased by 21,500 cubic meters to extend the site life to 2029 this is all based on current incoming quantities and waste densities, assuming we would achieve the same compaction. Capital cost estimate for both options for Laxton would be $305,000. It's different procedure at Laxton than Fenelon to achieve the additional volume, which is why there's difference in cost. There's removal of cover materials and so forth. Next slide, please. Three recommended options were prepared based on city feedback and based on our opinions. Recommendation A was close Fenelon and Laxton in 2024 once our approved capacity is achieved at those sites, and divert all waste to Lindsay Ops and upgrade the infrastructure at Lindsay Ops accordingly to accommodate all of the additional traffic, waste quantities, etc. Recommendation B would be to obtain approval to increase landfilling capacities at Fenelon and Laxton, as I just noted, and upgrade Lindsay Ops, but with more of a minimalistic approach than recommendation A, as the needs would not be as great as Fenelon and Laxton would continue to maintain their level of service. Recommendation C ties into recommendation B. It would be to operate Fenelon and Laxton as transfer stations after they reach their approved capacity, and upgrade the infrastructure at Lindsay Ops as per recommendation B. It should be noted that some of these recommendations may be eligible for development charges recoveries. Next slide, please. So the overview of recommendation A, you'll see that under this option, we have implemented the larger under this recommendation, we have implemented the larger option of redesigning the entire public drop-off area. I would require ministry approval. It's a pretty significant site change. So we would have to have new roads, new earthworks, new concrete, but we'd have more space for bins, more space for traffic. It would relieve congestion at the public drop-off area. We'd would implement infrastructure south of this big. In the figure left of the words recommendation A and right of the text, you'll see the scales up that we included in option 6. So we've included that as well, which is the entire option of adding the south outbound scale and the second inbound scale, as well as associated roadworks. So this option would cost $5.49 million with an additional operational cost of $90,000 per year. Closure of Fenelon and Laxton is expected to provide an operational savings of about $335,000 per year, however, because you would no longer have anybody operating those sites. Next slide, please. For recommendation B, The first point to note is that the capacities at Fenelon and Laxton would be increased. So you would increase the 40,000 at Fenelon, the 21,500 at Laxton, allow those sites to continue to function as is for more time than you currently have. You would implement option 3 and 6 from the option list I went through. Option 3 being the on-grade bins north of the municipal curbside recycling facility at Lindsay Ops, adds in Jersey barriers, some signs as needed, line painting to divert traffic appropriately to the area. And then we would upgrade the scales as well to address the queuing issues at the inbound and outbound scales. So option 3 with the bins would address congestion. Option 6 with the scales would address queuing. And also with keeping Fenelon and Laxton operating, we also expect less quantities incoming to Lindsay Ops, and therefore we'll have more waste site life at Lindsay Ops, and we'll have less traffic coming to Lindsay Ops that would have otherwise went to other sites. The total capital cost of this, so apologies for that. The total capital cost of this is about 2.09 million. The total additional operational cost at Lindsay Ops is $170,000 per year for additional staff and operation of another scale. Next slide, please. Recommendation C, as I touched on earlier, would be the way we looked at it would be something to implement after recommendation B. We would operate Fenelon and Laxton as transfer stations upon closure in 2027 and 2029 respectively. You would have to get ministry approval for that, and that approval process should start, in our opinion, 2 years prior to site closure. As I mentioned, the process takes about it could take around 6 months or more to get the approval with the Ministry of Environment. So you have to go through the design and get the approval supporting documentations together. And under this, so that's why we've noted 2 years to make sure there's adequate time to have that approval in place well beforehand. We would divert waste from Fenelon transfer station to Eldon, and we would divert waste from Laxton to Somerville or Eldon, thereby reducing the strain on Lindsay Ops and maintaining the existing site life of Lindsay Ops. The total capital cost of that, as I noted earlier, would be $40,000 for very minor work to set up the transfer station for new bins with earthworks. The total operational cost would be about $195,000 per year. But the closure of the sites would provide actual operational savings because currently both sites cost about $335,000 per year to operate. Next slide, please. So the summary of the costs, just so you can see them and compare, capital costs for A, B, and C are shown. As you can see, A is the highest capital cost, B is the next highest, and C is the lowest. The net change to operational cost per year is shown as well, where you have the most operational cost under recommendation B as the need for additional staff, but recommendation A, you have the most savings as you no longer operate Fenelon or Laxton. Next slide, please. With all this in mind, our final recommendation is recommendations B and C. This addresses current issues and accounts for future growth at the Lindsay Ops landfill. An additional inbound scale and relocation to the outbound scale would address traffic queuing. The reconfiguration of the public drop-off area would address congestion and allow more space for future bins if the diverted materials on site were to change and you needed more bins for different diverted materials. You would replace the aging scales. It is the most cost-effective recommendation at Lindsay Ops, as the change to the public drop-off area has very minimal capital cost associated with it. The change to the scale are the majority of the capital costs under this option. The scales are going to have to be replaced at some point. So that has to be kept in mind. And this option also maintains level of service at Lindsay Ops, Fenland, and Laxton, which is very important as site users of Fenland and Laxton are used to using those sites. There is a lot of distance between the landfills within the city of Kawartha Lakes. So site users that are used to going to Fenland or that are closer to Fenland or Laxton would likely, it's very feasible they want to continue going to Fenland and Laxton, not having a longer drive to get to the site. Waste collect, so you continue to collect waste after final cover is placed and the actual landfills are closed there. You continue to just collect waste and transfer it to other sites within the city. And the upgrades to Lindsay Ops would account for future growth, as you wouldn't have the expected traffic incoming. You wouldn't have the additional traffic incoming to Lindsay Ops would be reduced under this option, as we would not, as Fenland and Laxton would continue to be open. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time today. I'm open to any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Paul, for that very comprehensive review. I gotta admit my head's spinning a little bit with all the different options, but hey, that's just me. Let's get a motion to receive and we'll see if there's any questions for presentation. Councillor Elmsley, you'll move it. Second by Councillor Yeo, thank you. Questions? Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad I'm not the only one with my head spinning about options 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and recommendations A, B, C, X, Y, Z. But thank you for your presentation today. And just a couple of questions. Have you taken into consideration when you talk about Fenland closure being 2024, that we aren't using that landfill for 4 months every winter? So in that intervening time that is closed, it seems to me we would gain time for it to be open.
Yes, that has been considered in the quantity estimates.
Yes, it was taken into consideration?
Correct.
And my understanding is it will be available after 2024.
Sorry, what will be available after 2024?
With the closure for the 4 months during the winter, it extends the life of the Fenland landfill from 2024. Presumably, if it's 3 years, it would be, if it's happening for 3 years, you would gain a year.
Can I add on to that?
You can, Ashrak, yes.
Yeah, so I think this is something that was approved very recently by the city. So when we started doing the analysis, Fenland wasn't closed for 4 months. So the numbers that 2024 is based on, I believe it's based on Fenland operational as a whole. But yes, that is correct. If Fenland is operated, like not operated during 4 months, it will increase the capacity slightly, but it doesn't really change. You will get 1 additional year, but I think the recommended options would still be required just based on after that 1 year mark.
Okay. I'll move on from that to something else. If we were to go to source separated organics and taking out construction materials or separating construction materials and so that they were taken out of the landfill, that would extend the life of all the landfills for a period of time, would it not?
Correct. Yes, if you took, the more you could divert from the landfill, the more site life you would gain from it. Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers on how much SSO the city generates or C&D, but if you took them out of landfill, you gain the life, the volume.
Well, I think, the numbers that are being bandied around are like 40% for SSOs and another 40% for construction, which is a significant amount. But whether you'd achieve, that would be the upper level that you would probably want to achieve. The other issue is the changes to the Blue Box program presumably are going to help with the costing, that there will be money coming in for waste management from the changes to the Blue Box program. And would that go anywhere towards offsetting the costs of what we're doing at all of these landfills?
Adam, maybe you're the best one to answer this one.
Yeah, I think that admittedly is outside of the scope of this study. So this study is really about looking at Laxton, Fenelon, Lindsay Ops, and the upgrades that are required. We're not really able to have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen with blue bin, source separated organics, all that sort of thing. These are just upgrades that we know that are needed now.
Okay, thank you. Are any of these costs, Adam, in our current budget or financial forecasts, or are they being suggested to go into the 2023 capital and operating budgets?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, yes and no. So you've heard that the two weigh scales at the Lindsay Ops landfill are in dire need of replacement. So that's at least $500,000 that we are planning to expend in very short order through a capital program. And so those are monies that are already in the plans. The monies beyond that $500,000 are currently not. And so that's why, that's part of the reason why we're bringing this report to council, to have those approvals in place so that we can bring forward a full project in 2023 to address the needs of Lindsay Ops, and then to also plan further ahead for Laxton and Fenelon.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'll tell you that after reading this and hearing this, my thoughts are that we should work to extend the life of both Eldon and Fenelon to their limits and apply for the necessary permits immediately to do that. And I would also support replacing the scales at Lindsay Ops. And I don't know if what options those are, or if that's a brand new option.
Why don't we have that discussion when we get to the report? We're just dealing with the
Okay.
presentation, but your point is taken. Let's just wait till we get there. Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Just a question about the Lindsay Ops landfill. You had mentioned about the existing cells. Will they accommodate for the time being if we do this renovation or these alterations or improvements? And perhaps it would prevent immediate expansion that's proposed. So right now, if we do this, we change the scales, make it more efficient. The existing cells that are there, in your calculations, do they have the capacity for at least the next 10 years or so?
Based on the incoming quantities that we projected with the current waste densities, it's about till 2035 that the site would last.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, Mr. Mayor, through you, the existing cells, in terms of cells that are actually constructed there right now, they will likely be at capacity by 2024 or 2025. And so that's why for 2023, we do plan to bring a capital project forward to construct the very last cell that is currently approved. for that landfill site. So that's sort of the plan right now. So we have to make a distinction between cells that are actually constructed and cells that are approved to be constructed. That those are different things. So Paul is correct that in terms of what we are approved to build, that capacity should get us to 2035. In terms of the existing cells that are actually constructed, we would be lucky to get to, I think, 2025.
That last reserve cell, that's located right in the existing footprint of the landfill. It's not an expansion, it's already there.
No, there's construction associated with it. I know what you're getting at with that. I think it's built on top of the old landfill slope, but the liner still needs to be installed and all the infrastructure associated with it. And it's actually going to be split into 2 cells.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the presentation? I just have a question about, and I don't even know if it's in the scope of one of your proposals, maybe a question more for Adam, option 4B, where you talk about bringing in the non-waste off of Wilson Road, bypassing the scales, obviously, and just the recyclables. And yet, we've talked before about, at busy times, why don't we bypass the scales instead of tying everybody up at the scales? Same with the leaf and yard waste. And I'm just curious as to, obviously with that option, we're bypassing the scales and we're doing the recycling. I mean, but then I'm told that, we need to run over the scales to keep track of the weight of the recycling so that we can get our rebates from the province and such. Same with the leaf and yard waste. And I don't know, it seems like we're getting options presented to us that say, hey, we can do this over here to take some of the pressure off of here. But by doing that, we're bypassing the scales. But on the other hand, we keep being told everything has to go over the scales. It's how we keep track of everything. So I don't even know if that's, when I look at these different options, you know what, we're going to get to the report and we'll go there. And I'm fine with, even to Councillor Elmsley's point, some expansion and conversion. But I'm struggling a little bit with, we're doing a pretty big project here. Let's spend some more money on the Lindsay Ops landfill to put in extra sets of scales. And I'm just wondering if there's a simpler solution to, have an extra road that bypasses the scales for our non-waste items and try to work a little bit more with what we have rather than trying to redesign the whole thing. I don't know. I don't even know if that's within the scope of this project, but just a comment, if anybody wants to comment on it.
No, that's within the scope, and that's one of the reasons we fell to the recommendation we came to. The recommendation, I know that there was a lot of nomenclature, ABC, we ended up at recommendation B, which was the simplistic change to Lindsay Ops. There was no for the public drop off, there was no major capital upgrade. It was line painting, signage, and Jersey barriers to move to add additional space for drop off bins and to move the on grade drop off bins out of the current public drop off area. So that clears up the congestion in the current area. As for your comment on option 4B, the reason that we considered that is the operations staff can weigh out when they take the full bins off site. So they'll still be able to weigh your recyclables that are going off site. However, public traffic incoming won't have to weigh in and out. They're just dropping off free material and leaving.
No,
they don't have it if they needed to use
and that makes perfect sense to me. But if that's the case, why not just simply bypass the scales with our recycling and our leaf and yard waste with our existing system, rather than offer an option of building a whole new set of inbound and outbound scales, reconfiguring the roadway? Why not just bypass the scales? Wouldn't that help to ease the traffic burden at the scales and the lineups at some of the peak hours? That's what I'm trying to get to. And then that material could be weighed at another time, obviously, but rather than have every single vehicle have to go over the scales in and out, it just seems like I don't know, are we missing an option here?
So the reason for that would be the operations. Not all materials are free. So it's now on the site staff to delineate that site users have in fact only dropped off free material and tracked that on the way out. So everyone has paid their appropriate fee to use the site on the way out.
Okay, fair enough. Any other questions, presentation? We have a motion to receive then, all in favor? That's passed, thank you. We'll just go down to the report, 741, Future Infrastructure and Operations Study for the Lindsay Ops Landfill. What is council's wish? We got a motion that the report be received. Lindsay Ops Landfill Infrastructure and Operations Study attached as Appendix A to report be endorsed. We got the recommendations that you've just heard. Capital components arising from forecasted growth, some by development charges will be financed and applicable legislation. This recommendation be brought forward to council. That is the recommended motion. What does council want to do? Why don't we receive the report to start? That report, CA 2022-004, Lindsay Ops Landfill Future Infrastructure and Operations Study be received. Let's start with that. Councillor Dunn and Elmsley, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Where do you want to go from there? Councillor Yeo, go ahead.
Oh, apparently I wasn't muted. Okay. On the last part of the motion that says the growth-related components of the capital needs from financed by development charges. So if we're looking at about $2 million for Lindsay right now in this motion, I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that was about the price tag. And if Adam said that we're doing the scales anyway, and that's going to be $500,000. So out of that 1.5 million that's left, how much of that can actually be paid for through development charges? Any numbers off the top of your head?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a good question. We don't have a definitive answer on that right now because it depends on the rate of waste diversion. Right now we are undertaking a development charges background study. And as part of that process, we're making sure to get a handle on what the current diversion rate will be and what the projected diversion rate will be going forward. And that information will then be used to calculate a more precise rate of recovery in terms of development charges. But just to give an idea, if the diversion rate will likely be something around 20% overall, maybe a little higher, but if we were to use that conservative number, then that would indicate that 20% of those residual capital costs that are not related to replacement could be potentially recoverable through development charges. So that would give you kind of a ballpark figure.
But Adam, just for Emmett, just if I can get clarification on your previous question, the $500,000, I think, Adam, was for to replace the existing scales. Is that correct? And the $2 million price tag would be for reconfiguring the road and adding an extra set of scales in the recommended option. Is that correct? So I just want to make sure that's what would be applicable to some development charges, not the $500,000 to replace the existing scales, I would assume.
Yeah, that's certainly correct, Mr. Mayor. So if I can just be a little more precise with the numbers. So it's roughly 2.1 million to do all of the upgrades at the landfill. That number itself is actually a little outdated now because it's a 2020 number. So we'll have to index that for inflation, but let's work with that for now. Then deduct about 500,000 for replacement of scales. You're left with about 1.6. That would then be prorated at a rate of about 20% for waste diversion. And then that 20% would be subject to recovery through development charges. But again, I just don't want to be prejudicial to the development charges study underway. So I'm just using examples right now. we'll have to see what the rate of recovery will actually be.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, I've heard too many numbers. Just give me a bottom line here if you can. What's it going to cost us that we haven't already agreed to? So take the scales out. The scales are broken. They need to be replaced. We're going to replace them regardless of what's left. How much is coming out of the current taxpayer's pocket? How much of it's coming out of the development charges? Just roughly. Be conservative, you know.
For the recommended motion, correct?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure, sure, I can do that. So again, through you, Mr. Mayor, if I work with that 20% diversion rate, which I think is a bit on the conservative side, then that would mean 80% of the residual capital costs, and by that I mean the capital costs that we're not already committed to, would be about $1.3 million.
Thank you.
Would have to go on to the tax-supported part of the budget.
With the recommended motion that's in front of us, correct? Okay. Councillor Helmsley, follow up?
That's correct.
Sorry.
And if I could just also clarify for council, Mr. Mayor, this is just a recommendation for planning purposes. This is not to actually approve this project or any project. It's just to give us some direction so that when we do come to council through a budget, we've got something to work with.
So this puts it in the plan, and any of these recommendations will come forward during budget time for individuals' approvals as we move forward, just like every other plan.
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley?
I'll go back to what I was saying previously, Mr. Mayor. I would be happy with a motion that we extend the life of Laxton and Fenelon by seeking the permits to increase their capacity, and at the same time replace the scales in Lindsay, and let that be what we do for now, and the rest can come forward in next year's budget.
But why would it come forward in next year's budget if we don't endorse the plan? I think that's their whole point, is they have nothing to bring forward if we're not endorsing the plan and saying, yeah, let's have a look at this, let's get it brought forward, let's get it in front of council as it moves forward. Otherwise, we're doing nothing with Lindsay as opposed to trying to deal with some of the issues there in the future as it gets busier.
I'm fine with endorsing it to go to the next budget, but if I'm reading this correctly, and somebody help me if I'm not, if we approve it as printed, we're approving turning Laxton and Fenelon into a transfer station in 2024 and whatever, respectively, and not seeking the permits to expand them.
No, if you look at the report, the three-prong recommendation, the expansion of Fenelon and Laxton to extend their life cycle, conversion of Fenelon and Laxton to transfer stations once their lifespan is up, whenever that might be, and then the improvements to the Lindsay Ops, landfill, capital, and operating as part of the recommendation. So it's a three-prong recommendation. They're not saying they're going to close them in 2024. They say when they're due to be closed, and obviously with winter closing, it's going to go forward. And if you look in the report, it says to be approved for purposes of planning and budgeting. So I think, and I'm, it's a lot of information, but I think the recommendation we have in front of us gives direction for them to start planning and bring those items forward in a future budget, and then councils of the day can make a decision where they want to go from there.
I hope so.
Yep. So I will look for a motion as printed for the remainder of the motion. I think we're good there. You'll move that, Councillor Dunn. Councillor O'Reilly, you'll second that. Councillor Yeo, you're okay with that? Okay. You're going to second it? Yep. I think it gives good direction in a lot of ways. And then, yeah, as we get to some of these capital costs coming forward, it gives them some work to do, but we're not committing to anything in the long run. Decisions can be made in the future. So any further comments or questions on that? Councillor Ashmore?
Just a clarification, what Councillor Elmsley was saying, what he was trying to say, I understood, was that staff it said in the report that staff need direction in order to start the permit process to keep these two open. And that'll extend the life of not only them, but Lindsay Ops. So there's something in there, I forget what page it was, but it said that they needed authorization to start the process to get the permits approved in order to extend the life of Fenland and Laxton. So if we don't capture that, then that.
Yeah, I think it's in there, but let me just confirm with Adam that as part of the recommended motion, that direction is in there to apply for those permits for the expansion, Adam?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we in fact don't need that added direction because we've already got it from council. Council has already approved a project to obtain those approvals, and it's underway right now, and I think that's stated in the report.
Thank you.
So really the time sensitive nature of the recommendation you have in front of you really relates to Lindsay Ops, because we do really need to plan for the upgrades that are required there and hopefully have them or at least bring them forward for 2023 budget.
Thank you. Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, and through you, and I support the motion as well. I just want to clarify, though, we're moving it now, but this is for a full report coming in 2023.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, this is for staff to come forward to council as part of the 2023 budget to bring this item forward for deliberation.
And maybe not within the scope, but Adam, do you know how long would it take if we're going forward to obviously improve the Lindsay Ops landfill site? How long would it take? I know we're planning for it. How long would it take for the new cell?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, it takes typically at least 1 year to construct a cell. The next cell to be constructed is already designed. It's ready to go. So we will be looking to bring that forward as part of the 2023 budget and hopefully have that constructed by early 2024. And then as Paul mentioned, there's a whole other 2 cells that are approved to be constructed, but we would of course not bring those forward until of course we get closer to reaching that level of capacity.
Thank you. Any other, so Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
I just wanted to get clarification of it. Good. So the public consultation for the cells, these are cells that are already there, and they're not the major expansion that we're contemplating. That involved the future waste option study. Said that we were going to be expanding further down, further away from where the actual footprint is of the landfill. So these cells, I just want to get clarification. They're not new cells like outside of the area. They're existing cells that are just about ready to be used. They're very close by.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. So the cells that we are currently filling today, obviously are already approved. And then there are 3 more cells to be constructed that already have approval to be constructed. And so the councillor is correct that those 3 cells are not included in the expansion that would be envisioned for that landfill.
Okay, thank you.
But those 3 cells, are all included in the property of the Lindsay landfill site already.
That's correct. And they're the 3 cells that we hope will get us to 2035.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. We have a motion in front of us. The remainder of the motion as printed. Any final questions? Call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thank you, folks, for all the information. Appreciate it. And we will take a 10-minute break, and we will come back and deal with our reports.
Thank you, everyone.
The meeting back to order. We're now dealing with reports. Item 8, our first report is a proposed surplus declaration, closure and sale of a portion of road allowance and shoreline road allowance adjacent to 31 and 39 Fox Beach Road in Carden. I believe Sherry is going to give us a quick overview. And I believe there's Emmett's back. Hi, Sherry. And we're going to put up a map just for some clarification so we can get a bit of handle on what we're talking about here. So, okay, there's the map that Sherry asked me put up. It's there. Sherry, if you want to give us a quick overview on this, seems to be a bit of confusion by some, so maybe go ahead.
All right, so the land management team received a request from the owners at 29 Fox Beach Lane, asking to purchase a portion of the road allowance adjacent to their property. In reviewing that, the land management team reviewed the immediate area and noted that there were many encroachments and were supportive of selling the road allowance leading to water to resolve the permanent encroachments located there. Advertising was done on August 12th, 19th, and 26th, and Realty Services did receive public comments. Also, municipal law enforcement received complaints on or about March 7th regarding the garage and other structures that were limiting access to water. There is an alternate access in the area. It's adjacent to 323 Lake Dalrymple Road, and municipal law enforcement has been in contact with the complainant regarding the status of the enforcement procedures. So Realty Services has received the deposits to proceed with the sale, and the report is to advise council that the land management team recommends that the subject properties be declared surplus to municipal needs, and approval be given in principle for the closure sale of the required portions of the road allowance and shoreline road allowance to the adjoining landowners. The land is not required for municipal purposes because the road allowances adjacent are privately owned. Oh, so the road allowance that's adjacent is privately owned. The land management team felt that the sale would felt that the land was not required for municipal purposes because it's privately owned. Sorry.
You're on mute, Sherry. You put yourself on mute. We didn't hear that last.
Well, that's not helpful. So the land management team felt the sale would be best to rectify the encroachments issue, given that the substantial garage there encroaches on the road allowance. The city received the complaint about the access to water, but as mentioned, there's alternative access present at 323 Lake Dalrymple Road. The land management team recommends selling this road allowance and shoreline road allowance at the increased amount of either the set price of $15 per linear foot of road allowance or 23 feet per linear foot of shoreline road allowance, or the appraisal value, whichever is higher. So if anybody has any questions. Oh, the map that we put up just shows that the road allowance that we're proposing to sell actually runs on an angle. So we've marked up the map to show you how we would be distributing the road allowance itself to straighten out all of the land lines there. And then there's a piece that nobody has asked for. So that one would still be in our ownership until such time as someone reached out about that one.
So just for my clarification then, so what are we selling? Are we proposing to sell A, B, C, and D, or just A, C, and D?
It would be, nope, it would be A, B, and C. So A and B would go to the one owner, C would go to the other owner, and D we would still own it. Nobody's reached out asking for that one.
So A and B would go to 39 Fox Beach Lane?
Yeah, or I'm sorry, the map's too small for me to see. D might be 29, which was the first one.
No, that's D. What's confusing me is...
That's what I'm saying.
I know, but what's confusing me is you said D number 29 approached land management about buying their shoreline road allowance, but they're not even part of this report. This
Right,
is
so
just
that
dealing
came
with,
to
how did
council-
we go from 29 to 39 and 31? And what is it that this report is dealing with? Is it dealing with A, B, and C, or is it dealing with, I don't know what the heck we're selling here, sorry.
Okay, fair enough. I apologize for the confusion. So 29 came to Realty Services first, and we actually reached out to council at that time, and it was approved. So we are already in the process of selling to 29. Once that was in place, the other two reached out to us. So we had reached out to them saying, hey, we're going to sell to 29 if you're interested. They didn't respond, but they've now reached out to us. So now we are bringing that to council, and that's for A, B, and C. So A and B is for the one owner and C is for the other owner.
Gotcha, okay. So
Did I
when
clarify it at all?
Yeah, no, that helps very much, thank you. I guess I'm just, I mean, we can, without seeing the stake property and the encroachments, it's very confusing because with the creek there running through the property, because it's on an angle, a lot of the encroachments aren't actually on the road allowance. They're actually on the person's property because they're to the right of the creek. He's got an orange barrier up blocking it, and I'm hearing from people that he's blocking access to the road allowance, but according to the map, that's not the road allowance. The road allowance is over further because it's on an angle, and it is just a swampy access that I wouldn't even call it a road allowance, but it's obviously a piece of property. So maybe it dries up a bit later in the year.
So if I can speak to that, it's my understanding municipal law enforcement went out there and the orange fence is on their own property. They're only blocking off their own property, is my understanding.
And that's how I saw it as well when I went up there. Thank you. Okay, I've got that clear. Makes sense to me. Councillor Dunn, you had a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, how does 39 access their property? I'm looking at the two roads. Neither one of them goes to or by. Oh, it does. Okay, all right.
There's a gate there on the road, but those two roads do actually join. You can drive right through, yeah. Any other questions on the report? What is council's wish? Councillor Yeo, it's up in your ward. You want to wade in? Your hand's up. You want to move it as recommended?
I do. I just have one question while Sherry's here. Now, the road allowance, after all this stuff around the shore, it continues to run up through the property. So are we still going to own the rest of that road allowance that bisects the property behind the water?
So through the mayor to you, no, everything else is privately owned. We would only be selling the part that the city owns, and after that, we don't own any more in that area.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll move it as printed.
Moved as printed by Councillor Yeo. A second, Councillor O'Reilly. Thank you. Any comments, questions? Call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thanks, Sherry. Don't go away. 8.2.
I will.
Hopefully this one's a little easier. 8.2, proposed surplus declaration, closure and sale of a portion of road allowance adjacent to 8 Mitchell Drive in Emily. Go ahead.
All right, so the land management team received a request from the owner of the property located at 8 Mitchell Drive in Emily to purchase the road allowance adjacent to their property. Land management team reviewed the request at their meeting on November 8th, 2021 and had no objections. Realty Services requested a deposit on or about February 11th of 2022. We advertised April 7th, 14th, and 21st, 2022, and we did not receive any comments from the public. This report is to advise council of the land management team's recommendation that the subject property be declared surplus to municipal needs and approval be given in principle for the closure and sale of the requested portion of the road allowance to the adjacent landowner in principle for the closure and sale, to the adjacent landowner. The purchaser intends to use the space as a lot addition. The land management team were of the opinion that this would be appropriate for stop up and closure and then conveyance to the adjoining landowner as the subject portion is not being utilized for road purposes. The land management team recommends that this road allowance be sold for the higher of the set linear price or the appraisal value. And if anyone has any questions.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Richardson? Move it as printed. Thank you. Second by Councillor Elmsley. Got that right? Any questions, comments on the recommendation? Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. I just want to thank Realty Services. This has been an outstanding file, and it cleans everything up quite tidily, and thanks for your hard work on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion as printed. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Thanks, Sherry. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
8.3 is the capital Q4 2021 Q4 capital close. I guess Ms. Stover is our Director of Corporate Services, is going to give us an overview. I think we get this obviously every year, every quarter. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Letham. So you're right, a few times a year we bring this report forward to council, recommending that we close some capital projects or identify projects that require an extension. So this is the update as of the end of 2021. There's 3 appendixes to the report. Appendix A is the list of the 11 projects that were complete at year end that can now be closed. The budgeted value of those projects is about $8.5 million, and the report is recommending the $1 million surplus be returned back to the various reserves. Appendix B is the list of capital projects that are currently underway and are scheduled to be completed on schedule. That list totals about $128 million, and it's roughly 80% spent to date. And then Appendix C is the list of projects that are requiring extensions. That appendix is split into 4 categories. First section are multi-year projects that require an extension. The next group of projects are substantially complete, but we're just waiting for the final invoices to come in and or clearances. The third group of projects at the bottom of the first page of Appendix C, those were projects that were delayed due to COVID. And then the final group are projects that are needing an extension for various reasons, and the reasons are stated in the far column on the right-hand side. And the total value of all the projects on Appendix C is about $64 million, and again, about 90% spent. So there's no significant delays on any of these projects from an expenditure perspective. That's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple. The numbers shown at the top of the report, those are the balances in the reserve after the closing, or is that the amount that's going to be returned to the reserves?
Through the mayor, if you're referring to the first page, the recommendation that says the balances in the table below be transferred to or from the corresponding reserve, those are the amounts that are being transferred to those reserves. It's not the overall balance in the reserve. That's just the surplus that was identified in the projects that are being closed.
I'm referring, like it says, reserve, capital contingency reserve, $818,259.74.
Those are the balances being transferred to those reserves as a result of this report.
It says report closing balance. My question is it the closing balance in the reserve, or is it the amount that's being transferred?
It's the amount that's being transferred because of the closing of this report.
Thank you. The second question is, we're asking for an extension to June 30th, 2022 on the Cobequid Fire Hall, which I was told was completed in 2020 and we would never see again. Are we just waiting for an invoice on that, or what's happening?
Is there an explanation beside it? Most of them have an explanation. Does it say anything? I don't know where it is, but most of the extensions have an explanation, so if you can read it, it's pretty small. Just says landscaping and generator roof cover to be completed. So it's done. 95% complete. They're just doing some landscaping and putting a roof cover on the generator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the report? Can I get a motion? Councillor Dunn, thank you. Councillor Yeo will second that. Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thanks, Jennifer. 8.4 is amendment of Heritage Designation Bylaw 746, Janetville Road, Geographic Township of Manners. Emily is with us. Hello, Emily. You want to give us a 2-minute overview on what the ask is here, and we'll see what we can do.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So this is proposing the amendment of the designation bylaw for 746 Janetville Road. So this is the Janetville Mansion, sometimes known as the Doctor's Mansion. In Janetville, it's a fairly well-known property. The current bylaw for it, it was updated in 2018, and the update was quite bad. There are some factual errors in it, and it also doesn't identify the heritage attributes of the property particularly well. So I've worked with the owner of this property to develop an updated bylaw for this particular property for a couple of reasons. One is to correct the errors in the bylaw 2018-144, which is the current designating bylaw for the property. And also to expand the list of heritage attributes. As some of you may know, the property is going under an extensive restoration project at the moment, and the owner wants to make sure that all of those things that are being restored are captured in the bylaw so that it is protected going into the future. So really what this is looking to do is to delete Schedule A of bylaw 2018-144 and replace it with a new Schedule A, which is attached in the amending bylaw as Appendix A of this report.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Richardson, move it as printed. Thank you. Second, Councillor Vale. Any questions for Emily or regarding the report? Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, I spoke to Mrs. Sapasi yesterday, and she says she fully supports and recognizes how important it is to preserve, and she also wants to say how incredibly lovely and efficient you are, Emily Turner. So thank you.
Oh, I thought you were talking about me. You're talking about Emily, sorry. I was going to say I don't remember having that meeting, but thank you. Is this the house, I'm just curious, is this the house at the bottom of the hill on the way into Janetville on the left-hand side as you're going down the hill? Beautiful big property, the back gardens in the back and everything. I've been through that house, it's incredible.
Yes, that's...
Yeah, they gave me a tour of that house years ago.
Property.
It's an amazing piece of property, so that's good stuff. Any other questions on this? Now that I've embarrassed myself? All right, we'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Emily, next one is yours as well. The proposed heritage designation of 6697 Highway 35, Geographic Township of Bexley. And I believe this is the old railway station in Cobequid, but go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So yes, this is the Cobequid Railway Station, and this is proposing designating it under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So this is a little bit different from our usual designations, so I'll give a bit more of a detailed overview. So as I'm sure everybody knows, the railway station is currently being converted into the Cobequid Wellness Center. A large addition is being proposed for this property to house a variety of community services, including a medical office, et cetera, et cetera. And the process is being spearheaded by the Cobequid Norlanton Area Chamber of Commerce. So as part of this project, the property requires a plans-only site plan approval in order to proceed. The site plan is circulated to a variety of agencies for comments, as generally we do with site plans. I comment on this one because it is a historic building. It's listed on our heritage register. And one of my comments on the first circulation of the site plan was that the building be designated as a condition of approval for the site plan. So the reason that I requested this was because generally speaking, under our current heritage policies, if someone were to come forward with a site plan for a heritage property, we would request that they enter into a heritage easement agreement with the city. And essentially what a heritage easement agreement does is it ensures that heritage attributes of the property are being preserved during the redevelopment process. Unfortunately, because the city owns this property, we can't enter into a heritage easement agreement because we can't enter into that kind of agreement with ourselves. It's just outside of how the legal framework works. So the comparable process is to designate it under Part 4 of the Act. So this has been requested by myself in the site plan comments. I have consulted with the Coboconk-Norlandin Area Chamber of Commerce, who are supportive of this happening, and also with our CAO, as well as our senior staff. So everyone is on board with this designation. The work that Chamber of Commerce is doing on this property is great in terms of their restoration work of the building. So there's no concerns there. Really what this designation does is, on one hand, it fulfills our policy objectives, and it also really celebrates the work that the community in Coboconk has done in terms of retaining and restoring this building.
Thank you, Emily. Just a quick question. Will this designation in any way affect the renovation of the wellness center or the train station, or add any cost to it as a result of putting extra costs as a result of putting the designation on it at this time?
No, it won't. So the cost will remain the same. The site plan will continue to be reviewed by both myself and our Municipal Heritage Committee, and the designation won't change that.
Thank you. Any questions for Emily on the report? Councillor Yeo, are you okay with it? Will you move it as printed? Yep, moved by Councillor Yeo, second by Councillor Dunn. Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Emily, appreciate it. We'll move down to 8.6, release of Fenelon Falls PowerLink funds. I don't know if it's got Leanne, but I don't know if Craig is going to join us on this one. I think it's a pretty straight, yep, he is. Welcome, Mr. Shanks, our Director of Community Services. Do you want to give us a quick overview on this report, please? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to Council. So you'll recall at the last Council meeting, there was an update on achievements by the PowerLinks Committee that went to Council for the term of Council. So this is really, it was highlighted as part of their next phase of projects that they're wishing to do. So they look after the PowerLinks Fund, which are on behalf of the city, which are the funds that are generated for the city into a reserve fund as per the private dam that's operated in Fenelon Falls. Just very quickly, the PowerLinks Committee just recently updated that term of agreement, and they did a fantastic job. And the level of funds that are available for purposes of enhancement to Fenelon Falls, specifically the waterfront that PowerLinks makes recommendations on, has grown drastically. So this is part of that next phase. So what they're proposing is a pedestrian bridge on the lower gorge side of the bridge within Fenelon Falls. And in order to do that, they wish to do some design study work as well as some geotechnical work just to make sure that a bridge could in fact go there. The Trans-Severn Waterway would also require it in order to provide their permits to do this. There's been some talks with them, and they are supportive in principle as long as everything comes to light. So the release of this $150,000 would be to the Chamber of Commerce, who oversees much of the funding projects out of this fund, and they will lead this project so that it can be determined if in fact a pedestrian bridge could go across the lower gorge. And with that, they'll see if there's any questions, or perhaps Councillor Elmsley, as the councillor rep on that committee, has something to add.
Oh, I'm sure he does. Any questions for Director Shanks on the report first? Pretty straightforward, Craig. Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, I assume you'll move the recommendation. Do you want to? Why don't you move it, and then we'll see you can speak to it. How's that?
Sure.
Moved by Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor O'Reilly. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, just briefly, Craig summed it up very well, and it's part of a larger project that'll go forward to do some docking and to clean up a little park that is there as well down the road as maybe phase 2. And yeah, it's a wonderful project, and I think it's going to be very beneficial to the community.
So is this for docking or for a bridge? This is a pedestrian bridge,
This is
correct?
just the pedestrian bridge, but there'll be phase 2 and phase 3 in that area to clean up everything.
Not with this funding, though.
No.
That will be just coming.
Yeah.
They're going to do a lot of work in the lower gorge. so
Exactly.
This is the first part. Great.
Yep.
Okay, any questions on the motion? Call the question, all in favor? And that's passed. Thanks, Craig, appreciate it. And our last report today is Life Cycle Extension, local asphalt road section candidates, just a report to be received, but Mr. Farquhar is joining us. Welcome, Mike. Do you want to give us a quick overview of what we're looking at here, and then we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon to council. This report comes forward as part of the commitment by staff through the recommendation in the 2019 roundtable on roads, where staff committed to reporting to council yearly on the recommended segments for asphalt overlays through our life cycle program. So this report makes recommendations based on priorities brought forward by Public Works through spring breakup, as well as it takes into account recommendations or council resolutions for review that came through at time of budget deliberations. And as noted in the report, March 22nd, I believe, outlining outstanding council resolutions. So within the background, you will see the council recommendation or the council resolutions for reviewing segments within this program. Of those, 2 of them are within table 2 as part of our recommendations for that program. Now the program, the life cycle program, includes different types of treatments for rejuvenation or restoration, being asphalt overlays, surface treatment, microsurfacing, slurry sealing, and crack sealing. This report outlines the road segments that will be receiving asphalt overlays. Also in the report, I review the segments through the council resolutions that were not included and why. Now the list of priorities that were received from Public Works amounted to roughly 53 kilometers in length of segments that had been requested this spring. Of that, based on our budget of $865,000 for those asphalt overlays, we're able to do approximately 5.8 kilometers of road segment. Alternatively, if council chooses to, in the past couple of years, we've brought forward the report and the recommendations that we're looking at doing through this program, and council has chosen to look at adding alternative sections. If that is the case, we would ask that we would use the existing competitive contracts that we have in place to be able to implement any additional work added potentially within this given year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Mike. So this list includes, there was a $500,000 increase in the budget in the fall that council passed for life cycle extension. So this list includes that, correct? Not this particular list, because there's different components to it, but it's included in that program, correct?
Yeah, so this list is roughly that 865,000 that is a line item in that life cycle budget, and the life cycle budget is approximately 1.5 million.
Thank you. And did you say, just for clarification, Public Works put forward 58 kilometers of road, and this budget allows you to do 5.8? Was that, did I hear that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so we seek input through to Public Works in the spring, and from those different areas within Public Works, I received an overall list of requests. We consolidate those requests and then review them, but the total request, and including council resolutions to review, totaled approximately 52 kilometers.
And how many kilometers are we able to do with the budget out of the 52 kilometers?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, within the 865,000 that we've allotted within that life cycle program for asphalt overlays, we were able to do roughly 5.8 kilometers.
So just over 10% of what Public Works has put on the list to do. Okay, yeah. That gives us a good perspective, thank you, of the challenges ahead. So, so the report is just to receive, and that's, we're just, this is the table from, which is what we do. We supply a budget, Public Works and Mike come up with the list. So let's get a motion to receive, and then I do have a follow-up recommendation if council wants to go there, but I do have a bit of an idea. So how about we just do the motion that the report ENG 2021-011 Life Cycle Extension, local asphalt road section candidates be received, and this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration in the next council meeting. Councilor Riley and Dunn, thank you. All in favor? That's passed. So as you can tell by the report, you've got a couple of recommendations that weren't included in the table to do Clearview Drive, Chambers Road, and Sandbar Road, which were requested and passed by council to consider. They were considered, obviously, and then not as part of that priority. There are a couple of roads in Bethany that Councillor or Deputy Mayor Richardson, part of the Orphan Road program that would help with our maintenance. There's a couple of small pieces there, and I'm getting a lot of calls and issues about Dunn Street and Bobcaygeon, which is an absolute disaster and has been for many years. There's some construction going on up there, and if we do a life cycle extension there, it will get us through to when the construction's done and the road needs to be, according to Mike, it needs to be properly rebuilt sometime in the future. So what I kind of looked at, if council chose to include Sandbar Road, would cost $116,500. Chambers Road, half of Chambers Road, which was the resolution because it's a big road, to split it over 2 years, half of the road would be $139,000. Clearview Drive would be $17,000 in Emily. Palmer Road and East Street in Bethany are $35,000 and $36,000 respectively to do those two. And Dunn Street and Bobcaygeon would cost $120,000 for a total of $463,000. Now, in our capital close we just passed a couple of reports ago, from 2019 and 2020, there was $350,000 from the life cycle program from 2019 and 2020 that was returned to the capital contingency. So my suggestion is let's use that funding. It's the same program. It's obviously coming out of the reserve, but it just has been returned. Add another $113,000 for a total of $463,000. And then council, and according to Mike, this can be worked, these roads can be worked into the program this year, and then we can clean this up, and that's an extension of our life cycle extension program for this year and covering most of the bases. So, question? You'll move that recommendation at that cost with that recommendation of the funding to come from the capital contingency? Thank you. You'll second that? Any questions, comments? Councillor Yeo, question? Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just a question on the price. I'm just doing some math in my head. And why does it cost over $120,000 a kilometer to do this overlay? And that's all it is an overlay. Like, we can rebuild a road cheaper than that. So what, like, where's the cost, Mike?
Through you to Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, we've seen a significant spike in the cost of AC, which goes into asphalt. And just to give an example, in February, we were probably sitting around $700 a ton for AC, which will go into that asphalt. Now it's spiked based on geopolitical events. It's spiked to over $1,000 a ton. So we've seen some significant cost increases in asphalt. So there, that is some of it. Now, some of the costs too, globally when you put all that together, but you can see with Dunn Street will involve some more cost, not specific to manhole adjustments, some padding, which bring up that average cost being in an urban environment as it would compare to a rural environment. So when you take all those numbers together and average them out, it's higher, but there some other ones are putting up that average, like Dunn Street.
Okay.
For you, Mr. Mayor, just to add to Mike's numbers, I have it on screen here just to get a perspective to council. The price of AC, which is asphalt cement per ton, is the most expensive part of asphalt and asphalt products. So in January of 2021, the price of AC per ton was $617.25. The price at the start of April of 2022 is $1,156.00. So it almost doubled. And we're anticipating that there's going to be 2 more large jumps in AC prices between now and August.
Perfect.
So I'm assuming if we approve this, you'll get a change order done on the already approved work, and we'll lock in a price before that happens, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, staff, if council sees fit to add funds to this program, staff would ask that we would be able to utilize existing contracts. So our existing contracts is with Dufferin, who's doing the asphalt overlays for this program. So we would have to do a change order. And as long as there's no perceived change of scope issue that would bring us back to council, then we would proceed with a change order for these approved roads.
Thank you. Councillor Yeo, you had a follow-up? Go ahead, sir.
No, that's fine. I'm good now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question?
Yeah, just a question. Before I get a question to Mike there, I did a calculation here. So 2022, according to this, I came up with 6.7 kilometers. And when I went back and printed off what the 2021 was, there were 43 roads that we did, and it totaled roughly 20.8 kilometers. So we're only doing 1/3 of the kilometers that we did in 2021. That's one of my questions. According to this is what it adds up to. But there was another, and I appreciate the clear view. I certainly support the motion. That's great to put more money into this. This is a great program. It's excellent. Just a question through you to Mike. There was Cedar Glen was also a requested road, and whether it'll be on the radar someday. And Grassy Road was a road that we did with Deputy Mayor Richardson and I. We did a memo, and it was to be considered as well, Grassy Road. I'm just wondering, where is that Grassy Road on the plan, please?
Do you know, Mike?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. When we're preparing for this report, we reviewed the last report that went to council outlining the outstanding resolutions. Within that, we found 5 resolutions, approximately 5 resolutions that required us to report back to council to review specific road segments to be included in the 2022 life cycle program. Those are addressed in the report. There were also approximately 16 to 20 resolutions from council requesting us to review specific road segments for consideration in the 5-year plan. So I believe the segments that Councillor Ashmore just mentioned were segments that asked staff to consider in the 5-year plan. That next update report will come to council in July. So back to the cost. So I believe the 2021, I'd have to look it up, was substantially higher, had a higher budget than this year's. In addition, council also added monies same time last year to that program.
Okay, the 5-year plan, are you referring to the rural resurfacing or the 5-year plan? Is there a 5-year plan for life cycle extension? There's an actual 5-year plan for that, or I thought it was just a 5-year plan for rural resurfacing?
Just a 5-year plan for roads, all roads, and that update is coming forward this summer.
All right.
So a lot of the resolutions were that council's roads, would these be considered in the new 5-year plan coming forward? You'll get that in the next couple months. Okay? So the resolution, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. In the segments like Grassy Road, I believe Hawk, those resolutions requested staff to review it in the next 5-year plan update.
Correct, thank you. So just to be clear, and Sarah, make sure we got it, that we're proposing that $463 be added to the life cycle extension program, surface overlay, whatever it is, to be funded from the capital contingency, and that Sandbar Road, south of Cottage Road to Sandbar Park, half of Chambers Road from Mark Road to Highway 35, and Clearview Drive in Emily, Dunn Street in Bobcaygeon, and Palmer Road and East Street in Bethany be added to the program for 2022. Does that give you the direction you need, Mike, moving forward as a follow-up resolution?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, may I recommend maybe the addition with regards to staff utilize existing competitive contracts to implement this work this year?
Absolutely. You okay with that, Councillor Elmsley? So utilize existing contracts to add this additional work. And who seconded it? You did? So you're okay with that? Okay. And did you have a question, Councillor Dunn?
I was just going to say it's $435,000, not $435. But aside from that, that's pretty good.
For you, Mr. Mayor, just so we have clarification on the number, I have 463,500. Just want to confirm with Mike that that's the right amount.
You're correct. I forgot the 500 from Sandbar Road. It was 116,500, and I forgot that. So yes, so $463,500 be added to the program. Okay, and you had a question?
The question is the gas tax. 1 year we got gas tax money to help that. Is there any other provincial money, since it seems to be given out a lot right now, which is great?
Not right now. That was included in the provincial gas tax go toward transit.
Oh, okay.
Federal gas tax goes to our infrastructure, and that was included in our budget in the fall. So any gas tax we get this year will go into next year's budget.
All right.
Anybody questions? Everybody clear on the motion? I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Mike. Appreciate all the work on that for the meeting. We have no memos, and item 10 is a motion to adjourn. Councillor O'Reilly, Councillor Dunn, all in favor? That's passed. We will see you on May 17th. Thank you. Robin, are you still there? Can you stay on the line if you're still on Zoom?